In the small town of Whitesboro, New York, lived Mary Yoder, vibrant 60-year-old chiropractor who defied her age with her exuberant spirit and meticulous attention to health through exercise and diet, serving as a role model for her patients. She believed firmly in demonstrating that age shouldn't be a barrier to wellness. At her university years, she met her future husband, William Yoder, a fellow chiropractic student. Their mutual passion led to marriage. Together, they embarked on a joint venture, establishing a chiropractic clinic. William, with his methodical and pragmatic approach, managed the business aspects, while Mary, known for her engaging personality, handled patient care, earning their clinic a reputable status. The Yoders were blessed with 3 children, 2 daughters, Leanna and Tamarin, and their cherished son, Adam. By 2015, Adam, 25 years old, was working as a receptionist at the family clinic. His partner, Caitlin Conley, also employed there, came from a disciplined background as the daughter of a retired military officer. Known for her kindness, intelligence, and love for animals, Caitlin was a beloved member of the team. However, not all was perfect in the Yoder household. Despite plans for a leisurely retirement traveling across Europe, financial obligations meant continued work for Mary and William. On a fateful Monday, July 20, 2015, Mary's day was packed with appointments. But as the afternoon unfolded, patients began noticing something off about Mary's usual demeanor. Initially presenting with red, swollen eyes, she shrugged it off as a minor flu symptom. However, things escalated when her skin took on a greenish hue, and she began suffering from severe vomiting and diarrhea, leading her to call William for assistance. Upon his arrival, William was shocked to find Mary in a state of apparent shock, a stark contrast to her usually robust health. Despite her condition, Mary initially resisted hospitalization, opting for home remedies and rest. However, by the next morning, her condition had worsened significantly, prompting an urgent visit to the emergency room. There she underwent intense treatment, including IV fluids, to combat her unrelenting symptoms. Despite the efforts of numerous specialists, the cause of her sudden illness remained a mystery, leaving Mary in a state of fear and confusion. On the morning of July 22, Mary had her first cardiac arrest, followed by 7 more. By the afternoon, she couldn't hold on any longer, and she died. This all happened in the blink of an eye. A woman who always looked healthy deteriorated in just 48 hours and died in a hospital in the worst possible condition. This death seemed very suspicious to Mary's relatives because many of them belonged to the medical field. They started thinking in poisoning as an option, so they immediately requested toxicology tests on the body. At first, the doctors were skeptical about the idea because who would want to poison Mary? This only happens in movies. Mary was so careful that she grew part of her food in her garden, like lettuces, so the first doubt was that maybe an insect from there bit her and caused all this. But what kind of insect could do that? The toxicology tests revealed that Mary was indeed poisoned. First, they tested for arsenic and cyanide, which are the most common poisons in these cases. But no, it didn't seem she was poisoned with those. It wasn't until 2 months later that the lab identified what ended Mary's life. It was colchicine. Colchicine is a medication used for gout as it helps to remove uric acid from the joints, which causes this painful inflammation. But if used excessively, it can remove everything from your body. Mary experienced all the visible symptoms of a colchicine overdose, and probably also the invisible ones, like intense burning sensations on the skin and in the throat. This is one of the worst ways to die, and undoubtedly the question now was that it's clear Mary wanted to keep living, so who wanted to end her life? So it seems that someone deliberately poisoned her, especially since dying from this medication requires consuming a large amount. It couldn't have been an accident, and Mary wasn't taking this drug for any medical reason. After the case was declared a homicide, the police began their investigation, and the first suspect, as one might suspect and as often happens in such cases, was her husband, William. This could be yet another story where the victim's partner, driven by jealousy or an affair, becomes the perpetrator. Mary's sisters noticed that William was acting unusually, not appearing genuinely upset or saddened. However, in the absence of concrete evidence and after thorough interrogation, William was released due to insufficient grounds for charges, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Then, in a plot twist reminiscent of a thriller film, an anonymous letter surfaced at the police department. The author claimed to have knowledge of the real perpetrator, Adam Yoder, Sarah's youngest son. The letter didn't just make baseless accusations, it provided potentially damning evidence. It alleged that Adam had poisoned Mary's supplements with colchicine, motivated by a strained relationship and either a desire for inheritance or a twisted plan to gain sympathy and favor in her will. Acting on this tip, the police approached Adam's van without a warrant, but with his consent. To everyone's shock, a search revealed a bottle of colchicine under the passenger seat, along with a receipt bearing Adam's personal details. Stunned and proclaiming innocence, Adam insisted he was being framed. The situation was perplexing for the police as well, given the cinematic nature of the anonymous tip and the fact that Adam had been traveling out of state at the time of Mary's illness, which seemingly ruled out the possibility of him administering the poison. The mystery deepened as it became apparent that only two individuals had been in close proximity to Mary on the day of her illness: William and Caitlin Conley, Adam's girlfriend. This revelation cast new doubts and opened up further avenues of investigation in a case that seemed to be straight out of a suspense novel. Caitlin was the only one who had been with Mary throughout that day, but the police did not consider her a suspect initially because there seemed to be no motive for her to do such a thing. Moreover, she appeared to get along well with Mary. After Mary's death, Caitlin had even dedicated a post expressing her deep sorrow. However, Caitlin had recently ended her relationship with Adam, and there were a few things about her that didn't quite add up to the police. Thus, they concluded that Caitlin either knew something nobody else did or she was the guilty party. During the interrogation, Caitlin began by suggesting that Adam had been acting a bit strange lately. The interrogator, skilled at his job, asked the crucial question whether Caitlin had recently written an anonymous letter accusing Adam, forgetting to add her name before sending it to the police. Initially, Caitlin tried to evade the question but ultimately confessed to writing the letter, shifting her status from a witness to a suspect. Now there were three suspects. She claimed that Adam had confessed to her, but her account was riddled with inconsistencies and contradictions, likely a result of the immense pressure she was under. Caitlin also expressed a deep-seated fear of Adam, leading the police to provide her with protection as they delved deeper into the investigation. Crucial piece of evidence emerged when it was discovered that the email address on the colchicine receipt had never been used by Adam. This revelation came from tracking the IP address associated with the email, which led to Caitlin's home computer and phone. Confronted with this evidence, Caitlin initially suggested that Adam might have used her devices without her knowledge. However, this theory was weakened when investigators uncovered that not only had the purchase been made through her phone, but her search history also contained incriminating searches about poisons before Mary's death. Furthermore, Caitlin eventually confessed to buying the prepaid cards used for the purchase. The interrogation reached a climax with the revelation that Caitlin either acted alone or with an accomplice, as the gathered evidence pointed directly to her involvement. Overwhelmed, Caitlin broke down, facing the reality of being arrested for the murder of Mary Yoder. Meanwhile, the Yoder family and community were shaken by the unfolding events. Mary's sisters had harbored suspicions about Adam, their reasons anchored in a combination of hearsay and conjecture. Also, neighbors reported seeing William intimately close with one of Mary's sisters prior to her death. fueling rumors of an affair that could have begun before Mary's untimely demise. They also labeled William a fortune hunter, pointing to Mary's role as the main financial provider in the family. The sisters speculated that William, eager for retirement, saw Mary's death as a means to secure his financial future, especially considering a recent inheritance from his father that was insufficient for both of them to retire comfortably. This theory painted William as a man who orchestrated his wife's murder to ensure his own financial stability. At Caitlin's trial, her defense team pointed fingers at William, suggesting he could have easily tampered with Mary's supplements before leaving the house and had access to the work computer that Caitlin used. Other defenders accused both William and Adam. On this side were Mary's three sisters, who were so convinced of this theory that they created a website called Free Caitlin Conley, outlining their reasons for believing William and Adam were the culprits. However, there were doubts about this theory as well. For instance, one of the sisters claimed to have seen William using colchicine in the past, supposedly for his herb cultivation. But when asked when they last saw him doing this, they said it was in the 1980s, casting doubt on their credibility. Now, the origin of the colchicine used in the crime was a critical point of investigation. There were two potential sources. Firstly, it could have been procured from the stock at the Yoder Family Chiropractic Center. Both Mary and Adam were known to sign for deliveries, and the colchicine was used in treatments at the clinic. William could also access the center through his keys, so he could have easily obtained it. However, Caitlin, as the business administrator who oversaw all materials and financial matters, had even greater access to the clinic's resources. The second possibility was an online purchase. This scenario seemed to implicate Adam due to the receipt details, but also raised suspicions about Caitlin, particularly since the purchase involved a phone call where the operator recalled speaking with a young woman. Despite this, Mary's sisters insisted that Adam had manipulated not only the police and the judge, but also the operator, a claim that appeared implausible given that the receipt listed Adam, a male, as the purchaser. This web of accusations and counter-accusations added layers of complexity to the case. Regarding the IP addresses that traced back to Caitlin's devices, there were theories about William's potential involvement. Some speculated that, despite not being tech-savvy, William was intelligent enough to manipulate computers to his advantage. However, this notion was met with skepticism, as basic computer skills do not equate to the expertise required for such deception. On the other hand, Adam, being younger and potentially more tech-literate, might have had the capability to use Caitlin's devices for the purchases. Yet, the idea that he meticulously orchestrated the crime through Caitlin's devices, while using his own email with identifiable information for the transaction, and then carelessly left the incriminating receipt in his car, seemed highly improbable. This scenario was likened to a thief meticulously erasing all evidence at a crime scene, only to leave behind a note with their full identity and birth certificate. The intricacies and contradictions within these theories made the investigation exceptionally convoluted and challenging to resolve. As for Caitlin's involvement, it's hard to discern why she would commit such a crime. Looking at the dynamics between Caitlin and Adam, they had a toxic relationship with frequent breakups and reconciliations. Adam, known to struggle with alcohol and drug abuse, had been aggressive towards Caitlin on several occasions, including an allegation of sexual assault in 2014. Adam also had trouble finding stable employment and was not very responsible in his job at the clinic. Before Mary's death, she had started to become stricter about giving him money, adding to the complexity of the relationships within this family. Mary's sisters' contributions were also met with some skepticism. They alleged that following Mary's death, William and Adam were frequently seen together, hinting at possible collusion. However, it's a natural tendency for family members to seek solace in each other's company during times of grief, making this observation not necessarily indicative of guilt. The website created by Mary's sisters, filled with extensive text and purported evidence, didn't automatically lend credence to their theories. The sisters also questioned Adam's innocence because he brought a lawyer to his police interrogation, unlike Caitlin. This action, however, could be interpreted as a prudent move, especially considering Adam discovered a purchase of colchicine in his name in his car. The situation was rife with tangled suspicions and accusations, complicating the search for the truth. In legal contexts, having a lawyer present during interrogation is generally advisable. Caitlin initially faced questioning as a witness before her arrest. Her interrogation raised red flags when she made seemingly incriminating statements, like suggesting that poison is typically a woman's weapon, leading to accusations against her. The investigator countered this by rightly stating that poison could be used by anyone, challenging her line of reasoning. Caitlin's emotional reactions during interrogation, characterized by expressions of despair and feeling trapped, are often associated with individuals realizing the gravity of their situation, a behavior similar to that exhibited by notable criminal figures. The decision to grant William immunity during the trial raised eyebrows. Granting immunity means he could not be prosecuted for Mary's death, a move that might seem unfair to some. However, immunity carries risks. If the individual is found to be lying, it significantly undermines their credibility and can turn them into a prime suspect. In contrast to Caitlin's inconsistent responses, both Adam and William presented less contradictory accounts during their interrogations, adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate case. The motives for the murder could vary. Caitlin was with Mary every day, and Mary was her boss. Hatred towards a boss is a common sentiment, often kept hidden, so Caitlin's Facebook post mourning Mary doesn't necessarily prove her innocence. Some theorize that Caitlin committed the crime to reconcile with Adam. Despite his aggressive nature, there's evidence suggesting Caitlin often sought reconciliation with Adam. After Mary's death, they did get back together for a time, but then separated again. Interestingly, the anonymous letter accusing Adam arrived at the police around the time of their breakup. Determining the guilty party was not easy, and the trial took a long time. Finally, on November 6, 2017, Caitlin Comley was sentenced to 23 years in prison with the possibility of parole in May 2037. To this day, there are those who believe this was an injustice. If one looks at the case superficially and emotionally, it might seem that William had every motive to commit the crime. But evidence must guide case resolutions. William appears innocent, or at least seems so, because his actions are consistent with his psychological profile of being a serious person, among other things. In complex cases like this, where emotions and suspicions run high, it's the hard evidence that ultimately leads to the resolution. In complex criminal cases, similar to those often featured in true crime narratives, a recurring theme is the presence of high levels of narcissism in the perpetrators, with the notable exception of serial killers and similar profiles. In the trial involving the mysterious death of Mary Yoder, William, her husband, displayed notable attentiveness towards their son Adam, acknowledging the emotional toll the case had taken on him. However, William's involvement with his deceased wife's sister raised eyebrows, marking it as socially inappropriate behavior. Talking about Adam, there were certain aspects of his behavior and history that seemed to indicate a lack of sound judgment. This was inferred from his public interviews, known issues with aggression and alcohol, and a tendency towards impulsive actions. These traits suggested that devising a complex, calculated plan, such as sending an incriminating letter in his own name, was out of character for him. Conversely, Caitlin's psychological profile appeared to align more closely with the crime's nature. She demonstrated a self-centeredness that fit the typical profile of such perpetrators. Moreover, her intricate involvement in the case, particularly in accusing Adam, raised questions about her methods. Why resort to an anonymous letter and a convoluted scheme instead of directly contacting the police? It seemed likely that she was aware of the insufficient evidence against Adam and thus orchestrated a more elaborate plot. The investigators' observation that criminals often commit offenses under the belief that they won't get caught resonates in this context. Many believe they have devised an infallible plan and consider themselves more clever than others. This overestimation of one's intelligence is a common trait among criminals, but as this case demonstrated, their plans often unravel spectacularly. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina. She had 2 siblings and loving parents who tried to give their children the best of everything. From a young age, Kate showed a deep affection for animals and began volunteering at various shelters during her teenage years. She was also a dancer, had many friends, and was a very positive person. Everyone thought she had grown up in a very good environment, and to some extent, this was true. But one day everything changed. Just before going to college, Kate confided in her parents that someone close to their family had abused her when she was younger. She apparently did not reveal the identity of the individual, as this information is not found anywhere. The revelation was a real shock to Kate's parents. They had no idea what their daughter had been going through for years. After sharing this terrible secret, her mother and father did everything they could to help her. But the consequences of such trauma only seemed to worsen over time. Initially, Kate struggled with alcohol and later with illegal substances. At one point, her parents suggested she undergo therapy, which she accepted. They also encouraged her to move back home and live with her family, which supposedly would also help her cope with her problems. By then, Kate was an adult and lived separately. But despite everything, she agreed to return home. At first, it seemed that therapy was truly having a positive effect, but Kate continued to be unable to shake off the heavy burden of the past and start living life to the fullest. The psychiatrist she visited diagnosed her with depression. But at one point, everything changed. Her father, who was always concerned and striving to help her, suggested taking a trip to any part of the world she chose. Kate was excited by the idea and soon decided she wanted to travel beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to see polar bears, and despite her sad experience, she still felt a great love for animals. They began to look for suitable tours and soon bought tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle by boat. Kate was eager to embark on this exciting journey. At that point, her parents saw her depressive state being replaced by a cheerful and positive attitude. When they finally took the trip, Kate was delighted. She and her parents had a great time, and she experienced many positive emotions on the boat that took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate met another Russian tourist. They kept in touch throughout the trip and continued writing to each other afterward. Kate grew fond of him, and sometime after returning home, she decided to go to Russia. There they reunited, and she even considered staying longer in the country, but was prevented from doing so by visa issues, forcing Kate to return home. Despite this, it seemed that Kate had finally managed to overcome her depression. She planned to resolve her visa issues back home and even started writing a book for her children. It seemed her life was finally getting better. However, on Saturday, June 12, 2009, everything changed. That day, Kate was alone at home while her family was away on a business trip. Kate would always call her father to say everything was fine, but this time she didn't. Concerned, her father tried to call her, but there was no answer. After some time, he asked someone to check on their daughter at home. Given her past problems with alcohol and illegal substances, the parents were worried. Upon arriving home, this person did not find Kate, but strangely, the light in her room was on. It seemed as though Kate had just stepped out and would return soon. but Kate did not appear. It was also discovered that Kate had left important medication at home, which she needed to take regularly. Despite their anxiety, her parents decided not to panic and to wait for her return, considering that Kate was 28 years old at the time and capable of living her own life. Her father decided to wait until Monday, after which he planned to call the police. On Monday morning, the father received a call from the bank. An employee informed him that a man had attempted to cash a check for over $4,000 signed by Kate Waring. They couldn't reach Kate herself, and her father was listed as a co-signer on her account. The situation seemed extremely odd. The father knew for certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account. That was why the bank's security decided to contact him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared authentic. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police as Kate was still unreachable. Detectives began to investigate the woman's disappearance and first questioned Ethan Mack. He claimed to have known Kate for years and that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently gave Kate money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. Conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period. They indicated that there had never been a romantic relationship between the two, but they were always close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and went out for dinner at a restaurant. Afterwards, he drove her home and left for his own affairs. He even showed detectives correspondence with Kate, which confirmed his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Nothing suspicious was found during the search, but the police still found the situation regarding a check to be odd and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Eventually, Ethan called the police station, forcefully requesting to be left alone. The police tried to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night when Kate was last seen. She had seen her therapist in the afternoon, then went to the gym. Afterwards, she entered a store and bought a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her talking to someone on the phone at that time. According to the investigation, it is possible that she was speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up, and they went to a restaurant. Kate's parents recalled another disturbing fact on the day she disappeared. Kate had told them she was having some problems but declined to specify the nature of these issues. Her parents did not recall this conversation until a few days later. Unfortunately, this information did not aid the search. As weeks passed, Kate remained unlocated. Her parents felt the police were not doing enough, considering Kate's troubled past. In August, however, the case was revitalized when it was taken up by a group of former police officers led by a lawyer named Andy Savage. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case caught their interest. The team consisted of 5 individuals, each with extensive police experience. One of them, former detective James Randolph, first examined Kate's bedroom and noted 2 suspicious elements. Firstly, he was struck by a packet of medication that Kate regularly took. Her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking her medication, so the fact that the packet was left at home was highly concerning. Secondly, he found Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. Another team member, Bobby Minter, who specialized in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them, was then involved. His skills proved invaluable. He quickly found that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. She then left him a very troubling voicemail claiming someone had stolen her credit cards and revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., when, for some reason, she called her own voicemail number. Lewis discovered that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, learned something intriguing. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his and his mother's home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building. Eugene was fortunate to uncover these details since one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the team of detectives realized the police had not conducted a proper investigation into Ethan. They had only performed a superficial check of his mother's house. The team decided to investigate on their own and found that Ethan had a girlfriend named Heather Camp. When they asked Kate's parents if they knew the woman, her mother recalled a strange story. Kate had met Heather about a month before she disappeared on a train from Washington, D.C., where Kate had been having issues with her visa for Russia. After meeting her on the train, Heather told Kate that she had been robbed of her wallet and now had nothing to live on. Kate agreed to help and lent her a significant amount of money. Heather claimed she had landed a job as a pediatric surgeon in South Carolina and was supposed to start in the coming days. Later, Heather announced that her daughter had died in a car crash in New Jersey, and her behavior appeared completely irrational. She did not go there, and her demeanor suggested that her daughter's death did not affect her greatly. The detective team discovered another curious fact. Heather was facing a fraud case in Indiana. The charge was that she had been posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying the necessary documents. The team thus gathered an impressive set of data that forced them to look at the case from a different angle. They passed all this information to the police, but the police were completely reluctant to continue the investigation. The team realized that the only way to get the police to take action was to present incontrovertible evidence that implicated Heather in Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team took extreme measures. First, they asked the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a hidden camera in front of his apartment door. Moreover, they installed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car. This allowed the team to monitor his movements and see what he was doing. It didn't take long to bear fruit. After examining Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives discovered that he had stopped at numerous pawn shops around the city. They followed his trail and found out that at each of these pawn shops, the man was selling various pieces of jewelry in small batches. Unfortunately, they couldn't ascertain if the jewelry belonged to Kate, but the detectives felt they were getting closer to a clue. After some time, they encountered a serious problem. The landlord of the apartment where Ethan and Heather were staying informed them that he was going to evict them for non-payment. The teen realized that if he did, they would lose the chance to watch their behavior and movements. So, they made an effort to persuade the landlord not to do it. Along with this, the detectives urgently devised a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather an extra period to pay the rent, but with one condition. Both had to sign an agreement committing to clear this debt in any case. This strategy worked. As soon as the landlord gave the team this contract, they sent it immediately to the laboratory. The objective was simple: to compare the handwriting of Ethan and Heather with Kate's signature on the check for $4,000. And here they had a pleasant breakthrough. The handwriting expert confirmed with absolute certainty that the signature on the check was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract. This meant that it was Heather who had forged Kate's signature. But the team was well aware that the sluggish police would still not want to listen to them. They had to find something else and devised a new plan. They convinced the landlord to go along with it, and he told Ethan that the apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader put on an exterminator's suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. Before, the detectives waited until Ethan had left the apartment. Realizing that his car had moved away from the house, the investigator and the landlord entered. They faced an unpleasant surprise. Ethan was at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to cancel the whole operation. So the investigator had to change the plan. They kept insisting on the necessity of fumigating and asked Ethan to wait outside the apartment while the dangerous chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, suspecting nothing, agreed and left. At the same time, the investigator began to carefully search the apartment for any evidence that could link Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He noticed Ethan's backpack and examined its contents. There awaited their first clue: Chinese money. As we recall, the same notes were on Kate's bed, but that's where their luck ran out. He couldn't find any other potential clues. He and the landlord pretended to complete the treatment and left. The team needed a new plan again. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, they realized that there was a man who entered very often. It turned out to be a neighbor of the couple named Terry Williams. The detectives speculated that he might know something about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance. So the team took a risky step. They decided to offer Williams a significant sum of money if he told the police what his friends had done to Kate. They took the bag of money and went to Williams's apartment with this offer, but here the detectives were met with a quite unexpected twist. At the time when Williams was approached and informed of the situation, Heather was at her own home and overheard everything. Apparently, there was a discussion involving Ethan and Williams. When the detectives started speaking with her lover, Heather panicked. She called Ethan and hysterically explained what had happened. The investigation team did not expect this and spent the following days trying to figure out what to do next. Then, another surprise occurred. Williams called them and invited them to his house to talk. The detectives arrived at his apartment, and Williams spoke up. He claimed that Ethan and Heather had not directly told him anything, but he suspected that the couple had done something wrong to Kate. He then took an iPod from the shelf and revealed that Heather had given it to him shortly after Kate's disappearance, and Williams had assumed that the player belonged to Kate. The team examined the iPod, and thanks to its serial number, was able to confirm that it belonged to Kate. This set of clues was sufficient for them to return to the police department. This time, the local police could no longer dismiss the case. After reviewing all the evidence the team had uncovered, they finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She claimed that Kate's body was on Wadmalaw Island, about 20 miles from her house. The police sent a search team and scoured the area all day, but Kate's body was not there. It soon became clear that Heather had misled them. Then, Andy Savage decided to employ another tactic. He realized that Heather was probably directly involved in Kate's murder, so he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. He would do what was necessary to get her off the forgery charges, and in return, she would have to reveal the exact location of Kate's body. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She indicated that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Wadmalaw Island and gave a detailed description of the location. The team of detectives decided to go there without the police and faced disappointment. They did not find Kate, but they returned the next day and finally made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. The forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, but the culprits soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. The police discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had selected Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and started a relationship with him. As for Ethan, he was not quick to plead guilty, and his trial began in October 2010. Based on Heather's testimony, the prosecution reconstructed the events of the disappearance. According to her story, on the day Kate disappeared, she found out that Heather had deceived her and also stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to tell her father, who would likely involve the police. Heather told Ethan, who took her side despite his long friendship with Kate. According to the investigation, Kate was not just having dinner with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It seems that the pair was trying to negotiate with Kate to prevent her from revealing the deception. At the restaurant, Heather may have promised Kate to return the credit cards and the money that had been at Ethan's apartment. When the three arrived there, Heather and Ethan might have waited for the right moment to end with her life. The court questioned Heather's version of events and eventually sentenced her to 39 years in prison. As for Ethan, he was slightly luckier. He was sentenced to 25 years, this difference being that Heather was also charged with fraud. On May 5, 1993, the weather was perfect in the small town of West Memphis, located in Crittenden County, United States. The three 8-year-old friends were getting ready at their homes to go out and play. The boys had met at Weaver Elementary School, and what brought them together was the local scout group, where all three had reached the rank of novice scouts. First, there was Stevie Edward Branch, born on November 26, 1984, the son of Stephen and Pamela Branch. His parents had divorced when he was young, and later his mother married Terry Hobbs. Years later, the family expanded with the birth of his younger sister. Stevie was about 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 64 pounds, and had dark blonde hair. He was an honor student with a promising future, but at that moment, he was just a child. That day, he put on a white shirt and blue jeans, left his house on his black and red bicycle. Second was Christopher Byers, born on June 23, 1984, to parents Melissa DeFeer and Rick Moore. His parents divorced when he was just 4 years old, and shortly after, his mother married John Mark Byers, who adopted him, along with his 13-year-old brother, creating a new family. Christopher was the smallest of the group, standing at about 4 feet, weighing around 51 pounds, and had light brown hair. His physique matched his personality. He was very sweet and innocent. He wore blue pants, dark shoes, a white long-sleeve shirt, and headed to his destination. The group was completed with Michael James Moore, born on July 27, 1984, to parents Todd and Dana Moore, and he had an older sister. Michael was the leader and stood out for his strong personality. He was about 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 77 pounds, and had brown hair. Before leaving, he put on blue pants, a Boy Scout shirt, and a cap from the same organization. He liked wearing the uniform even when he wasn't at Scout meetings. He was a real enthusiast. He rode on his green bicycle to meet Christopher and Stevie. The three boys headed toward the Robin Hood Hills, where they played all afternoon. Around 6:30 p.m., Christopher's stepfather started calling them to come home, but he only heard the echo of his own voice in response. After half an hour of waiting and growing anxious, Mark Byers decided to go to the police station to report the three boys missing. Although the authorities began a search, it had to be limited because it was already very dark, and the trees covered the entire area. Nevertheless, families and neighbors carried out their own search until dawn, but they could not find any trace of the three children. At the break of dawn the next day, the police started a more comprehensive investigation, led by the search and rescue personnel of Crittenden County. They searched every corner of the forest, but they could not find even a single clue. Around 1:45 in the afternoon, just when they thought all hope was lost, they reached the Robin Hood Hills, the wooded area where the boys had last been seen. Officer Steve Jones spotted a black shoe floating in a creek, leading to the largest drainage channel in the hills. He alerted his supervisors, and they acted quickly, searching the area downstream of the ditch. There, they encountered the most shocking sight of their lives. The lifeless bodies of the three children were at the bottom of a lake, having been tied hand and foot with their own shoelaces. Their right ankles were tied to their right wrists behind their backs, and the same was done with their left legs and arms. The horror did not end there. Both Michael and Steve had bruises all over their bodies. Christopher, on the other hand, had bruises and abrasions on various parts of his body, as well as cuts on his private parts and bite marks. However, this was not of particular attention to the detectives. No one could understand the magnitude of the crime. It had been perpetrated with a cruelty that transcended human limits. At the bottom of the same muddy ditch, wrapped around sticks, they found the children's clothing. Most of the garments were inside out, as if they had been hastily removed. Something that particularly caught the detective's attention was that the underwear of 2 of the children was nowhere to be found, and one pair of pants had traces of fluid, leading to speculation about a possible motive of sexual assault. However, before drawing any conclusions, they had to wait for the forensic analysis. The case was just beginning. The investigation process was hindered because the officers had removed the bodies from where they were found before the forensic scientists arrived to conduct the pertinent studies. The crime scene was contaminated, as the chief of police was continuously smoking, throwing cigarette butts into the ditch. The autopsies indicated that Christopher died from multiple wounds that caused him to bleed out, while Stevie and Michael died from drowning in the ditch. The autopsies indicated that Christopher died from multiple wounds that caused him to bleed out, while Stevie and Michael died from drowning in the ditch. The hypothesis of sexual abuse was discarded because the studies showed that the wounds were the result of a knife attack, and there were no signs of sexual abuse on the bodies of the minors. Speculation began about the possibility that the children had been attacked somewhere near the woods and then murdered in the ditch. Christopher's autopsy stood out from the rest. He was the only victim with drugs present in his system, specifically Ritalin. While the boy took the medication daily due to his attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the dose found in him corresponded to a level higher than that indicated by his therapist. The details emerging from the case were increasingly disturbing, and the townspeople grew more and more anxious, exerting pressure on the police. They were desperate for a quick resolution and a culprit to blame. Suddenly, it seemed as if a light had been shown on a potential suspect, a teenager who seemed to fit the criminal profile. His name was Daniel Eccles. He was 18 years old and had a substantial record of minor offenses, such as vandalism and theft. He had dropped out of high school and had been institutionalized due to mental health issues. The police, who had been speculating for some time, saw him as the perfect scapegoat. Eccles was always attracting too much attention with his heavy metal band fandom, his interest in pagan religion, his dark clothing, and his black hair, making the townspeople feel scandalized whenever they saw him. His family, being from a lower social class and having had interactions with social services on several occasions, was also known to the police. On May 7, 1993, Eccles was interrogated for the first time. He denied knowing the 3 murdered children or having anything to do with the case. He even agreed to a polygraph test, which suggested that he was innocent. However, prejudices persisted, and there was no concrete evidence against him. Despite this, the media and the entire town had already deemed him guilty. Public opinion alone was not enough to close the case. The manager of Bojangles, a local restaurant, contacted the police for the second time that week. After seeing the case on television, he believed there might be a connection to an incident that had occurred at his restaurant on May 5th, near where the bodies were discovered. At 8:40 p.m. on the day of the children's disappearance, he had called the West Memphis Police Department to report a strange incident. A man with brown hair had entered the restaurant, covered in blood, with muddy feet, a bruised arm, and appearing disoriented. He had then gone into the women's bathroom. A few minutes later, the man left the restaurant, and the employees discovered blood smeared on the walls of the bathroom. Officer Regina Meek responded to the call, speaking to the manager through a drive-through window. She didn't seem particularly concerned about the information and left without checking the bathroom. After the manager's second call, Detective Bryn Ridge and Sergeant Mike Allen returned to the restaurant, this time with a more proactive approach. They collected scrapings of the blood from the bathroom wall, but did not bother to question the other employees about the incident. The scrapings were never sent to a crime lab for analysis and were later declared lost. The lead was dismissed because the prosecutor argued that it was completely absurd to think that the person who committed the murders and took great care to hide the bodies, clothes, and bikes of the children would enter a public place covered in blood. Moreover, the injuries would have made it very difficult for one person to have killed all 3 boys alone. The police were desperate for someone to bear witness to the crime that they believe Eccles had committed. They interrogated Jesse Miskelly Jr., a 16-year-old with a mental disability, for 12 hours without the presence of his parents or an attorney. After numerous twists and turns, Miskelly implicated himself, Eccles, and Jason Baldwin in the crime, despite not having any connection to Eccles. However, his statement was inconsistent with the forensic evidence, as he described the boys being tied up with an industrial rope, whereas they were actually bound with their own shoelaces. Within a few hours, Miskelly retracted his statement, even providing an alibi that he was in another town watching a wrestling match on the night of the murders. But it was too late. The police had what they needed: 3 perfect suspects, capable of creating 3 distinct knots to subdue the victims, just as the crime scene suggested. The media frenzy that ensued portrayed the 3 suspects as guilty, further fueled by the satanic panic phenomenon sweeping across the United States at the time, where heinous crimes were often associated with devil worship and the resurgence of cults. The West Memphis authorities crafted a strong narrative against the 3 young men, labeling them as outcasts who had committed the murders as part of a satanic ritual. When Eccles' home was searched, a book with a pentagram on the cover was found. The police saw this as sufficient evidence to claim that the 3 teenagers were involved in a black magic cult, shaping the narrative they wanted to impose on the public consciousness. People began to come forward claiming they had seen Eccles near the crime scene. Detectives managed to interview 2 girls aged 12 and 15 who claimed they had heard Damien confess to the murders. An anonymous statement claimed to have seen Eccles covered in mud on the night the children disappeared. However, the real lead was provided by a woman named Vicky Hutchison. She said her son Aaron, who sometimes played with the 3 young victims, had seen strange things in the woods. Nonetheless, her statement was dismissed due to its lack of solidity. Vicky didn't give up and provided a second statement in which she claimed to have seen the teenagers performing a ritual, which later turned into debauchery, on the same night the victims disappeared. She alleged that the teenagers had abused the boys. However, there was no evidence of this on any of the bodies, and her testimony was extremely odd. Vicky committed to gathering more evidence and invited Damien to her home for a conversation. She hid a microphone and recorded every second of their talk. However, the young man didn't say anything that could be used against him. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, the police stated that the tape was inaudible, but didn't prove Eccles' innocence under any circumstances. Both he and Jason were arrested on June 3 of that same year. Jesse Miskelly Jr. was tried separately from the other 2 accused, providing several statements that did not match the facts narrated by the prosecution. The trial was heated, and an expert on false confessions stated that the young man had suffered from police coercion. They had taken advantage of his mental condition to tell him a version of the crime, and he ended up believing it. However, none of this was taken into account when delivering the sentence. On February 5, 1994, Miskelly was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. Although he avoided the death penalty, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment plus 40 years. The trial of Eccles and Baldwin was as scandalous as their companions. Evidence used included Stephen King books, black metal band flags, and psalm lyrics written on the walls of the accused rooms. The verdict was emphatic. The young men were part of a satanic cult and had murdered the children to carry out a ritual. Fibers and a knife found by divers in a lake behind Baldwin's house were also presented as evidence. However, it couldn't be proven that any of these items belonged to the accused youths. It was circumstantial evidence, and they were not given the right to appeal. Much of the evidence that the defense attorneys hoped to present was excluded by the judge. Eccles was sentenced to death by lethal injection for being the mastermind of the crimes, while Baldwin was sentenced to life imprisonment. When asked if there was any reason why the sentence should not be pronounced, Baldwin reaffirmed his innocence. Eccles, completely devastated, shook his head. The execution date was scheduled for May 5, 1994, but nothing was that simple. For the victims' families, the sentence had been handed down too quickly, and there were unresolved issues, which began the most mediatic part of the case, attracting the attention of the most unexpected figures. The young men were already known throughout the country as the West Memphis Three. The case aroused the interest of several prominent figures in the music world, whom Eccles and Baldwin listened to. Among them was Pearl Jam's lead singer, Eddie Vedder, who helped raise money for their legal defense. Natalie Maines, the lead singer of the Dixie Chicks, also joined the cause of the trio. The metal band Corrosion of Conformity included a song inspired by the case called Free the Three in their album Wise Blood. But it wasn't just musicians who were part of the media defense. The young men also received support from Johnny Depp and several film directors. In 2007, with significantly more advanced technology, new DNA tests were conducted. These tests showed that there was no trace of the three accused on the bodies of the children. The bite marks also did not match any of them. Most shockingly, the results suggested the presence of other individuals at the crime scene. A hair found on one of the shoelaces of Michael Moore was consistent with the DNA of Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather. Hobbs had a criminal record and was known in the town for having a long history of mistreatment, including assaulting his wife, allegations of hitting minors, and attacks on neighbors. Another hair found near the crime scene on a tree stump was consistent with the DNA of a friend of Hobbs, named David Jacoby. Both claimed to have been together on the night of the murders. Hobbs emphasized that he believed the guilty parties were already behind bars. However, 3 witnesses presented sworn statements claiming they saw Hobbs with the children on the night they disappeared. The police did not initiate legal actions against him, but the media did. Peter Jackson, the renowned director, began producing a documentary with the goal of reconstructing the events, pointing at Stevie's stepfather as the murderer. New testimonies were collected. Jo Lynn McCarty, Michael Moore's mother, claimed she saw Hobbs washing clothes on the night of the murders, presumably to clean mud off his clothes. Additionally, a cherished pocket knife belonging to Stevie, which he almost always carried with him, was later found among Hobbs' possessions. Finally, and perhaps most damningly, 3 young men claimed that a nephew of Hobbs told them his uncle had been the murderer, but it was a family secret. Opinions among the victims' families began to diverge. The stepfather of Christopher Byers started to suspect Hobbs, even calling him a child murderer. However, Todd Moore believed that the evidence against Hobbs was not convincing. He pointed out that his son spent a lot of time at Stevie's house and could have easily picked up a hair with DNA on his shoelaces on one of those occasions. The tipping point came with the reappearance of Vicki Hutchison, who admitted that she had agreed to collaborate with the police in exchange for a $30,000 reward. She was supposed to provide false information to implicate Eccles. This revelation indicated it was time to redeem the West Memphis Three. In 2010, 17 years after the crime, the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered that the DNA evidence must lead to a new trial. The West Memphis Three reached an agreement with the prosecution, adhering to the Alford plea, which allowed them to assert their innocence, while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. On August 19, 2011, they were released on a suspended sentence of 10 years after having spent 18 years in prison. However, they remain on probation and could be incarcerated again for more than 21 years if they reoffend. The procedure allowed the accused to freely express that they are innocent, even though their official record still lists them as guilty. In interviews given after their release, Baldwin stated that he had been reluctant to plead guilty to crimes he did not commit, but he did so to spare Eccles from the death penalty. Although the families of 2 of the victims came to believe that the trio was innocent, a spectator shouted "murderers" at the 3 as they left the courthouse. It would be very difficult to undo the scandal that the West Memphis police had constructed. In a press conference, the 3, now adults, stated that their main concern was clearing their names. In 2013, a new version of the story emerged from Billy Wayne Stewart, a self-confessed drug dealer, and Benny Guy, a convicted felon. The story was not firsthand, but had reached them through Buddy Lucas, a teenager from the town. On May 5, 1993, Buddy had gone out with Terry Hobbs, David Jacoby, and his friend John Mark Byers to buy marijuana from Stewart. They then got into Hobbs' truck and drove around the city, smoking and drinking whiskey. They reached a wooded area, and at that moment, Hobbs asked the two teenagers to get out and fight while he and Jacoby watched in a fetishistic act. It was unclear whether this led to any intimate activity. During the course of that afternoon, Christopher Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch appeared on their bicycles. Upon realizing they were witnessing something they shouldn't, they decided to leave, but it was too late. Hobbs shouted at his companions to stop the boys, while Jacoby hit one of them. That's when the attack occurred, resulting in the mutilation of Christopher's genitals. The other boys had seen too much, so they decided to kill them all. The clothing and bodies of the boys were collected and dragged to the water, and their bicycles were thrown into the swamp. According to Stewart, when he tried to call the West Memphis police investigator to tell him Buddy Lucas' story, he didn't even bother to return the calls. These statements are public knowledge, but the case remains closed. It is unclear if the authorities prefer to leave the case as a collective myth rather than seeking true justice for the victims and their families. Born in Oregon in 1975, Stephen Nichols lived a mostly private life until the early 2000s. In his mid-20s, Stephen and his first wife, whose identity remains anonymous for safety reasons, moved to China. During their time there in 2003, she accused him of attempting to suffocate her and throw her off their 8th-floor balcony. Stephen denied these allegations and faced no criminal charges in China. The marriage eventually fell apart, and by 2005, he returned to the U.S. as a single man. He owned a 3-bedroom condo near Portland, Oregon, which was too large for just one person. This led him to search for a roommate online to occupy one of the empty bedrooms, a decision that would profoundly impact several lives. Julia Simmons, a single mom, took immense pride in her eldest daughter, Rhonda Casto. Rhonda was born on July 2, 1985, in Galveston, Texas, and possessed stunning beauty. Julia's joy was complete with the birth of her second daughter, Melanie, 5 years later. Rhonda's striking beauty and charisma seemed destined to bring her success. During her teen years, she embarked on a modeling career, earning the admiration not only of Julia, but also of Jessica Colburn, Julia's best friend from high school. Rhonda was not only photogenic, but also had a beauty that ran deeper than mere looks. In 2005, Julia came across Stephen's online advertisement for a roommate and felt it was a perfect fit. After an initial conversation, she found Stephen to be charming and promptly rented a room in his condo, moving in. Then one day, Rhonda, a 20-year-old beauty, showed up at Stephen's door, leaving him utterly struck by her allure. She introduced herself, and he was instantly smitten. Stephen believed he sensed reciprocal interest from Rhonda, though he couldn't be sure if it was wishful thinking on his part. Never considering himself a handsome man, Stephen believed his intelligence was his most appealing feature and that this attracted Rhonda. Whatever her reasons, Rhonda responded to Stephen's advances and soon moved into the condo, not as a roommate of her mother's, but as Stephen's girlfriend. Stephen wasn't content with just having Rhonda's affection within 3 months of meeting her. He also developed feelings for Melanie, her sister who was still underage at the time. His infidelity remained hidden, and by 2008, although they hadn't married, Stephen and Rhonda became parents to a daughter they named Ava. In the meantime, Julia relocated to another condo. Fully committed to motherhood, Rhonda lavished Ava with love. However, she was not immune to the postpartum depression that affects a considerable number of women. Rhonda was particularly distressed about the weight she had gained during her pregnancy, which posed a challenge to restarting her modeling career. Additionally, Stephen's prolonged absences and hesitancy to propose added to her emotional burden, causing her to feel neglected. Consequently, the relationship between the two began to deteriorate. Rhonda's close friend, Jessica, knew about Stephen's infidelity and even asserted that he was physically abusive to Rhonda. Despite this, Rhonda tried to maintain the relationship for the sake of her daughter, Ava. Towards the end of 2008, both Stephen and Rhonda took out life insurance policies, naming each other as beneficiaries, with Ava listed as a contingent beneficiary. In early 2009, Stephen decided to increase his insurance coverage to $1 million. Around the same time, Rhonda resolved to return to her modeling career, recognizing the need to improve her physical condition first. Stephen suggested they go on a hike at Eagle Creek, a popular but potentially dangerous trail in the Columbia River Gorge. Rhonda informed Julia of their plans and asked her to care for Ava for the day. Before leaving, Rhonda made a lighthearted but eerie comment to her mother about the possibility of being murdered. She thought Stephen had planned the hike as a romantic setting to propose to her, or he had darker intentions such as pushing her off a cliff. On the morning of March 16, 2009, the couple woke up early, left their daughter Ava with Julia, and began their hike. Rhonda captured the start of their outing with a photo of Stephen. However, the trip was cut short under mysterious circumstances. While ascending the slippery and moss-covered Eagle Creek Trail, they faced several challenges. The inconsistent weather made the trail wet and treacherous. They reached a particularly narrow part of the trail, where only one person could pass at a time. What transpired next remains an enigma, known only to the couple. According to Stephen's account, Rhonda was in a playful mood and had jokingly draped a towel over her shoulders, dubbing herself Supergirl. She started running and then slipped, falling from a height of over 150 feet. Stephen claimed that he spent an hour looking for her through rain-soaked terrain. When he finally found her and attempted CPR, he collapsed from exhaustion. Back at home, Julia grew increasingly anxious as the day wore on. Eventually, Stephen awoke, but with no cell service to call for assistance, he made his way back to the trailhead. Around 6 p.m., he finally reached his car and called 911. Rescue arrived roughly an hour later, determining Rhonda's injuries to be consistent with a fall. Her death was initially ruled an accident. In the aftermath, Julia received a visit from a chaplain, sent by the local fire department, who regretfully informed her that her daughter was gone forever. In the days that followed, Rhonda's family and friends gathered to pay their last respects at her funeral. To Julia, Stephen's behavior during the ordeal seemed unusually detached and lacking in genuine grief. Although media coverage of the incident in 2009 was sparse, initial reports suggested that the police didn't suspect foul play. Despite this, county detectives took their investigation very seriously and began to scrutinize Stephen's account more closely. Julia's persistent insistence, driven by her hope of accusing Stephen of her daughter's murder, also played a pivotal role in prompting a more in-depth investigation. Stephen cooperated fully during police questioning. The forensic examiner reported that most of Rhonda's injuries were below the waist and also found traces of various prescription medications for anxiety and depression in her system. While authorities stopped short of definitively ruling Rhonda's death as an accident, Stephen was not charged with any crime. Shortly thereafter, he moved to another part of the state, taking Ava with him. Surprisingly, less than 6 months after Rhonda's death, Stephen faced charges for sexually abusing a 13-year-old girl, allegations he has consistently denied. His legal troubles persisted when he attempted to claim Rhonda's life insurance money. The insurance company refused the payout, arguing that the policy was void due to inaccuracies in the application. Furthermore, it remained uncertain whether Stephen, as the policy's beneficiary, might have been involved in Rhonda's death. If so, he could be ineligible for the payout under Oregon law. A federal district judge later ruled that the $1 million should be placed in an interest-bearing account under court control. The insurance company's lawyers agreed that the money would go to the couple's daughter once she reached adulthood. Stephen's insistence on claiming the life insurance money only deepened suspicions about him, providing Julia with what she believed to be clear evidence of his ulterior, financially motivated motives for allegedly murdering Rhonda. The legal process wasn't progressing as quickly as Rhonda's mother had hoped. 4 years after the incidents in 2013, Stephen still had not faced any charges. Eager for a fresh start, he relocated to a distant yet familiar place, China. In this far-off but now recognizable setting, he moved to Wuxi, situated 120 kilometers from Shanghai. Here, he found employment as an English teacher for Chinese business professionals. According to his own account, Ava acclimated seamlessly, mastering Mandarin in just 2 months. Besides being fluent in Mandarin, she participated in dance courses, took taekwondo training, and started learning the piano. Progress was evident for Stephen as well, as he found love once more. Back in the United States, investigators were continuously working on Rhonda's case. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Julia, for her part, maintained his guilt and pressed the authorities. Then, in a turn of events that caught everyone off guard, true crime writer Stephen Jackson entered the picture in April 2014 and set things in motion. A grand jury reviewed the evidence and covertly indicted Stephen for murder. All the while, he remained in China, completely unaware of the judicial trap being set more than 11,000 kilometers away. The relationship between Stephen and his new partner, Landy, was growing stronger to the extent that Landy had stepped into a maternal role for Ava. Within less than a year, Stephen proposed to Landy, and she said yes. The couple planned to have 2 wedding ceremonies, one in the United States and another in China. To initiate their plans, Stephen and Ava flew to the U.S. in February 2015, with Landy set to join them shortly thereafter. However, upon their arrival in San Francisco, airport personnel informed Stephen that there was an issue with his luggage. Instead of continuing on to his connecting flight to Oregon, Stephen was separated from Ava and taken into custody by detectives from San Mateo County, California. They interrogated him about Rhonda's death, but he declined to discuss the matter. Despite his reticence, the questioning persisted for about 3 hours. Stephen was subsequently extradited to Oregon, while Ava was placed in the care of Rhonda's family. Right after his arrest for murder, Stephen was charged with 2 counts of rape in the 3rd degree, and 3 counts of rape in the 4th degree, and 3 counts of 3rd-degree sodomy for allegedly engaging in sexual intercourse with Melanie, his sister-in-law, when she was a minor. Once again, Stephen denied all accusations and entered a not guilty plea. His attorney highlighted the unconstitutional nature of the 3-hour police questioning. The defense even assembled their own team of investigators to visit Eagle Creek Trail, aiming to demonstrate that Rhonda's death was the result of an accidental fall. During this period, Stephen faced various pretrial hearings that delved into multiple issues, including the available evidence and the motive behind Rhonda's death. The defense argued that her death had been an accident, raising questions about the necessity of a trial. On the other side, law enforcement revisited the site where Rhonda fell and conducted an unusual test using crash test dummies matching her size and weight to explore the theory that she had been pushed. Despite mounting pressure, Stephen remained resolute in his denial of guilt, maintaining that he had genuinely loved Rhonda. In August 2015, he attended a bail hearing. His lawyer, Arnold, scrutinized the scientific validity of the tests surrounding Rhonda's fall and centered the defense on the notion that her death had been a tragic accident. Arnold emphasized that Rhonda was the fourth fatality on that particular trail in just 6 months, arguing that similar incidents were more common than most people believed. Christopher, the forensic doctor, testified that Rhonda's severe injuries were all below her waist, suggesting she had primarily landed on her legs and pelvis. Arnold interpreted this as evidence that Rhonda had slipped feet first. If she had been pushed, the injuries would have been more widespread across her body. However, Julia countered these arguments by stating that Stephen had ample motive to harm her daughter, accusing him of being both abusive and unfaithful. A bail amount of $2 million was set, and Stephen, unable to secure this sum, returned to jail. Meanwhile, Jessica mustered the courage to visit the location where her best friend Rhonda had fallen for the first time. By May 2017, after numerous hearings debating the admissibility of evidence, including Stephen's admission of a sexual relationship with Melanie, it seemed that his long-awaited trial was approaching. But in a twist that shocked and disappointed Rhonda's loved ones, a settlement conference led to a surprising outcome. The prosecution and defense reached an agreement allowing Stephen to plead guilty to lesser charges, specifically criminal negligent homicide and coercion, thereby removing the murder charge from the equation. The assistant county prosecutor acknowledged that while they believed Stephen was guilty, the challenge lay in the lack of adequate evidence to bring before a jury. To secure a murder conviction, the prosecution needed to demonstrate Stephen's intent in causing Rhonda's death. As defense attorney Arnold emphasized, there was a dearth of concrete evidence, only vague hints and conjectures. Complicating matters further, a significant amount of evidence was lost when the detective handling the case retired and wiped his computer files. This development was a devastating blow for Julia, who was left angry and frustrated. Jessica was also in disbelief, seeing it as a glaring gap in the justice system. Arnold consistently defended his client, arguing that innocent individuals often enter guilty pleas to achieve a particular outcome. He stated that dropping the charges enabled Stephen to continue pursuing custody of his daughter, Ava. The defense was aware of various issues plaguing the juvenile court system, where delays could significantly impede a child's reunion with their parents. Stephen himself confirmed that this was the sole reason he agreed to the deal. He received credit for time already served and was placed on a 3-year probation. His ankle monitor was removed, effectively ending his time in incarceration. Back on the streets, he remained concerned about the situation with Ava. But in 2018, in an explosive television interview, Stephen admitted for the first time to behaving inappropriately with a minor and also acknowledged having sexual relations with Melanie.
That's Melanie?
Correct. What were you thinking? I wasn't. It was a very stupid decision. When questioned about killing one sister to be with the other, he remained evasive, even defiant. Moreover, he told a news story on camera, stating that Rhonda didn't slip, but, due to postpartum depression, took her own life.
But lead people to think that you killed one sister to be with the other sister.
You can believe whatever you want. Some people are gonna believe that I'm innocent. Some are gonna think I'm guilty. So, I believe what you want to believe. Julia reacted strongly to his claims, asserting that, despite the medication her daughter was on, Rhonda would have been incapable of making such a decision, especially considering how much she loved Ava. However, this turn of events further complicated Stephen's quest to regain custody of his daughter. Adding another layer of complexity to the already intricate case, Julia was sentenced to 30 days in a rehab facility and received a 3-year probation term after admitting to unlawfully claiming $39,124 in Social Security benefits meant for her granddaughter. She was also mandated to repay the sum. While some reports suggest that a 2018 ruling terminated Stephen's parental rights and placed Ava in foster care, there is no official confirmation of this. Meanwhile, the insurance payout from her mother's policy remains in a bank account, said to be accessible when Ava turns 18. Currently a teenager, Ava continues to be under state care. Juliet Ledromagit, affectionately known as Juju, was born on May 2, 2013. Her parents are Paraguayan William Zapata and Frenchman Stéphane Ledromagit, who gave the little girl both nationalities. Charlotte, the couple's firstborn, completed their family. Eventually, the spouses divorced, and Lillian joined Rainer Oberber, the German citizen who had arrived in Paraguay just a year before to settle in the country. It was known that he had worked on projects or campaigns related to human rights in Europe. Juliet had microcephaly, a neurological condition that causes motor disabilities and cognitive developmental delays. The girl was described as a cheerful, affectionate, and lively child who enjoyed playing outdoors. From mid-March 2020, Juliet had been living on a farm in the city of Emboscada with her mother, sister, and stepfather. According to reports about the case, Rainer convinced his partner to settle there when the quarantine was imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything seemed tranquil and almost idyllic in this corner of the country, but that calm was unexpectedly and dramatically shattered on April 15, 2020. On that day, little Juliet disappeared without a trace while on the property where, in addition to her family, there were 2 workers. According to information released by the Paraguayan newspaper ABC on the morning of April 16, when the local school director realized that one of his students had been missing since the previous morning, he notified the authorities. Immediately, officers from the police station of Emboscada went to the residence of the family. It was at that moment that the mother reported her daughter's disappearance. Lillian said that the 7-year-old, who had difficulty moving, and the cognitive development of a 3-year-old had gone missing at around 9:30 in the morning the previous day while playing in the gated complex where they lived, along with a pair of goats that were also missing. She explained that, as time passed without her daughter returning, she asked for help from some neighbors to search the property, but they were unsuccessful. The search operation was immediately launched, involving police officers with trained dogs and the participation of local residents. As the hours passed, fears for the safety of the young girl grew. No one could believe that something like this could happen in that peaceful place. Additionally, on April 17, a team accompanied Lillian to check 2 properties in different parts of Emboscada where they had lived, but they found no traces of the child. On the same day and in the following days, alongside search efforts, various law enforcement agencies conducted interviews with the mother, stepfather, and workers at the location. They also requested information from the telephone companies of the adults responsible for the minor and individuals connected to the case, as well as reviewed security camera footage from nearby businesses. Some witnesses reported seeing the child for the last time on April 15 at 10 in the morning. Initially, the hypothesis was that the child had gone missing while following the goats. However, investigators considered this version unlikely since the child had difficulty moving, and the goats were pregnant and did not typically stray far from the area. The property covered about 30 hectares and included several buildings. With no traces of the child found on the property, The investigation was reinforced on April 20 with the addition of prosecutors from the anti-kidnapping unit. Day later, the goats with which Juliet was said to have been playing were found. They were found in good condition, 4 kilometers in a straight line from the house, passing through a densely wooded area. Due to remote disability, it was impossible for the girl to make that journey with the animals. The next day, the police expanded the search nationwide. During the first 2 weeks of the investigation, the prosecution team conducted several searches on the family property. These inspections resulted in the discovery of blood traces in various places, including in a van driven by Reiner. In his initial statements to the prosecution, the German citizen claimed to have left the house twice in the mentioned vehicle on the day Juliet went missing. However, the police investigation would later determine that he had actually left the property a total of 3 times. In addition to the forensic and technical work being done to determine Reiner's possible involvement in the disappearance, officials in charge of the case obtained relevant information during their interviews with various witnesses. Juliet's nanny and one of the workers on the property told detectives that Reiner easily lost his patience when it came to the younger of his daughters. On the other hand, Juliet's sister, who was 10 years old at the time, made a statement using a special system, which is used to interview minors to ensure their safety and comfort. Day later, the young girl left the country as a protective measure to reunite with her biological father in Switzerland. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation detailed that a sports shoe, a sheet, a towel, and a carpet had been seized, all of which reacted to the blood detection reagent. He also stated that tests would be conducted to determine the origin of the blood residues. The representative of the public ministry reported that new searches had been conducted at various addresses and that 2 vans owned by Reiner had been seized, as well as electronic devices. He explained that although they were investigating the case as a missing persons case, they did not rule out any hypotheses, from an intrafamily matter to the involvement of a third party. It was also reported that a computer had mysteriously disappeared from the location. When questioned about it, Reiner stated that he had sent it for repairs but couldn't say where it was being examined. As the investigations continued and knowing that the authorities considered them as suspects, Reiner and Lillian made a video offering a reward of approximately 10 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $1,400 at that time's exchange rate, for any valuable information that would help them find the child. In the message, they expressed that they were deeply affected. The mother spoke directly to her daughter, saying that she missed her, as did her sister. She also explained that they were under restrictions because they were being investigated. As the days passed, Lillian and Reiner changed their initial version, which pointed to Juliet having gone missing. Instead, they now claimed that Juliet may have been abducted from the property and deprived of her freedom, a change in position that also raised suspicions among the authorities. While the prosecutors had this hypothesis on the table, it seemed unlikely because there were 200 meters from the property's entrance to the place where the child was last seen. This implied that, to take the child, the perpetrator would have had to get out of a vehicle, open a wooden gate, enter with the car, take the child and the 2 goats that had also disappeared, close the gate again, and leave. However, it was not credible that the 3 people in the house at that time did not hear the sound of a vehicle. Based on the findings during the investigations, the prosecutors charged the mother and stepfather of the child with failing in their duty of care and education, as well as abandonment. On May 4, the public ministry searched the residence and arrested Lillian, 33, and Reiner, 55. The prosecution announced that both had declined to provide an interrogatory statement and were in preventive detention. One of the figures who appeared in the media and pointed to Reiner as a suspected person was Rufino Zapata, Lillian's father and Juliet's grandfather. During a radio interview, he stated that the family had strong suspicions that his daughter's partner could not stand the little girl.
While he clarified that he could not accuse, the information they had made them think that the German citizen could be linked to his granddaughter's disappearance. Furthermore, the young girl's grandfather said he believed that his daughter knew something about what happened to her granddaughter and was under pressure not to give details about the case. He also expressed that Reiner was a horrible person, and he feared what he might do. In mid-May, during a video call interview, Juliet's biological father expressed his trust in the detectives and requested that a complete investigation, especially Reiner. He mentioned that since Lillian joined the German citizen, she had distanced herself from her family and only associated with his circle. He said that he did not distrust Lillian, whom he considered a loving and careful mother, especially with Juliet. Additionally, he mentioned that his other daughter had told him about a very serious matter. He said that further investigation was needed and that he had some suspicions about what might have happened to the little girl. Although he didn't know who was responsible, he was certain that it wasn't an accident. According to him, his elder daughter told him about the day her little sister disappeared. The girl said that while she, her mother, and other people were searching for Juliet, Reiner remained seated in front of his computer the entire time. He added that during that day and into the night, Lillian and the little girl were searching for Juliet, but they didn't have the help they needed. While defending his ex-wife, he also suggested that, in his opinion, she was a victim and had no idea what had happened. The father of the child appointed a group of lawyers, including Oscar Tuma, to represent him. The attorneys filed a series of complaints against Juliet's stepfather, accusing him of deprivation of liberty and taking the life of his daughter. Oscar Tuma had collaborated several times with an organization which had been working since 2013 for the protection of children in Paraguay, especially those declared missing. Reiner insisted on his innocence, stating that he had nothing to do with Juliet's disappearance. On May 18, the police once again searched the Julia Fanwis property, but found no trace of the child. The police and the prosecution had already conducted a series of inspections, especially in places where German citizens who were part of Reiner's circle stayed. Electronic devices, closed-circuit recordings, and documentation were seized. A more intense search was also ordered, considering the possibility that the child might be found deceased. Some buildings were examined, and floors were lifted, but none of these efforts yielded results. The media covered the case, especially the differences of opinion between Juliet's father and his lawyer, Oscar, who announced in early June that he was stepping away from the case. According to him, his job was to find the truth, but his client's demands would not allow it. When asked about it, he added that Stefan's decision to side solely against Reiner went against his convictions. The lawyer took the opportunity to explain that, in his opinion, all the pieces of evidence pointed to both of them as responsible for the child's disappearance. Despite intense efforts, the lack of results from the various actions undertaken caused frustration among both the investigators and the child's grandparents. However, as time went on, and based on information contained in various seized devices during searches, detectives made discoveries that changed the course of the investigation. On July 23, the prosecution expanded the charges against Juliet's stepfather to include possession of child sexual content. In a press conference, the investigators revealed that, after analyzing 80,000 photographs contained in the seized electronic devices, they found adult material and intimate images of Juliet and her sister. According to the prosecutor, they had indications that the stepfather of the minors had captured the images. The established truth concept dictates that the person who took the photograph is considered the alleged perpetrator. This was articulated in the reasons for the charges against Reiner, as the images were found on his cell phone. Early the following year, the prosecutor in charge of the case declared that the investigation into Juliet's disappearance was getting closer to the truth. However, 2 months later, the case remained unsolved, and a decision by the main suspect came as a surprise. On March 17, 2021, the child's stepfather offered 350 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $44,600 at the exchange rate of that time, for information about Juliet's whereabouts. Through the lawyers who made the announcement, Rayner insisted on his innocence and claimed that he or the kidnappers of the child could have entered the property through the rolling gate or from the neighboring property. On that occasion, he defended the mother of the missing child, who was also being held against her will, and criticized the justice system, stating that he never imagined that the truth could be suppressed for so long and that judges and prosecutors were trampling the law. The following month, just before entering a hearing to provide an interrogatory statement, the German man made statements pointing to Rufino, Juliet's grandfather, and urged journalists to investigate his partner's father. "If you want to investigate a bit, I'll give you a clue. Approach or ask Juliet's grandfather, who always says he knows more. And maybe he does know more than he says. And all I can tell you is that angels will become demons, and demons will become angels," he said. Rufino reacted to the accusations made by the main suspect in the case, stating that these accusations were part of a strategy by the lawyers. He also called on the prosecutors to follow him wherever they wanted and reiterated that his family was available for cooperation. In that context, he also mentioned that he had lost contact with his daughter months ago and emphasized that, in his opinion, she must know something about what happened to his granddaughter. While awaiting trial, an appeals court granted Lillian limited freedom of movement. On September 24, 2021, Lillian Zapata was sentenced to 6 years in prison for failing in her duty of care and abandonment of her daughter. Despite the guilty verdict, she remained free pending the confirmation of her sentence. In the case of Reiner, unlike his partner, he was acquitted of these same charges. The court believed that he had no involvement in the act of abandonment. However, he still faced charges related to the possession of sexual content involving minors. Only 2 months later, on November 9, Lillian was once again sentenced. She was given an additional 2 years of imprisonment with the suspension of the sentence's execution, after being found guilty of contempt of a court order. The November ruling came in response to her refusal to undergo a DNA test, which was intended to determine if the blood traces found during the investigations matched the child. She also rejected a toxicology test that aimed to determine if she consumed narcotics. "I don't know. The prosecution never informs me of anything. They never communicated with me. From jail, I did everything for them to investigate, even sent a letter to the French embassy. All I ask is that they search for and find my daughter." Lillian refused, arguing that it was her body, and she wouldn't give consent for the tests. Before the end of 2021, the court revoked the decision to keep Reiner in preventive detention. The verdict established that the public ministry did not find sufficient evidence to incriminate him, absolving him of all guilt and penalty.
In an unexpected turn of events, a video posted on a popular social network on May 31, 2022, showed a girl on the streets of Ecuador who appeared to have the same characteristics as young Juliet. The recording was apparently made in public by 2 foreigners. When asked about it, officials from the public ministry confirmed that the girl in the video seemed to be Juliet, but provided no further details to protect the ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, it was announced that a technical verification of the content and origin was being conducted. This information led Stefan to request a copy of the Swiss documents to travel to Ecuador to verify if the girl in the video that circulated on social media was Juliet. His request led to an incident at the airport during which his older daughter, after visiting her mother in Paraguay, was detained by airport authorities when she was about to return to Europe. It was reported that officials found her missing sister's documents among the girl's belongings. As a result, the girl missed her flight, but there were no other reported consequences. in a new chapter of this case. Judge ordered the capture of Lillian to enforce the prison sentence imposed in 2021 for the charges of violating her duty of care and abandonment. On August 16, 2023, Juliet's mother appeared before the court and requested the postponement of her imprisonment, invoking a provision in the Penal Code that allows the postponement of the sentence for mothers of children under 1 year old. However, on August 17, the court ruled against her request and ordered her immediate confinement at the National Women's Penitentiary, where she will serve her 6-year sentence. The judge mandated that her baby must receive pediatric care, social assistance, and all necessary care to ensure the well-being of the child and his mother during the breastfeeding stage. 3 years have passed since Juliet's disappearance, and many loose ends remain. One of the hypotheses being considered is that the girl disappeared on April 14, a day before the date the parents reported to the authorities, following an incident inside the house, and was subsequently moved to another location with the goats. To this day, it remains unconfirmed whether the blood found during the investigations belongs to Juliet, among other reasons due to the refusal of Lillian and the biological father to provide the necessary samples for DNA comparative studies. Nevertheless, Stefan remains vigilant for any progress in the investigations and has offered a reward for information leading to Juliet's whereabouts. Juliet's grandfather, Rufino, also refuses to give up. On several occasions, he has expressed his concern about the lack of results in the investigation and has requested the collaboration of the public to report any information or suspicions that could lead to Juliet's discovery. National authorities assure that the investigation is ongoing, and the police are following several leads. All that remains is to hope that the responsible party or parties for Juliet's disappearance confess, or that someone provides credible information that leads the authorities to the truth.
Bobby Jamison and Sherilyn Jamison, despite some eccentricities, were a rather ordinary couple. They preferred to keep a distance from commitments and other socialization demands. The couple met in the summer of 2002 and quickly fell in love, marrying soon after. Sherilyn had a son, Colton, from a previous marriage, who got along well with Bobby. In 2004, their family expanded with the birth of their daughter, Madison Jamison. The Jamisons lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, where Colton had spent part of his childhood. However, in July 2009, Colton was sent to live with his father for unknown reasons. Life wasn't always easy for the Jamisons. Sherilyn had battled depression since her sister's death in a bizarre accident involving a bee sting on her tongue. She was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sometimes neglected her medication. Bobby faced his own challenges after a car accident, left him with chronic debilitating back pain, preventing him from working. The constant pain and financial worries contributed to his depression as well. Their mental health issues began affecting their marriage, leading to arguments and discussions about possible divorce. The Jamisons were a reclusive family, often keeping their personal matters hidden from even those closest to them. Bobby and Sherilyn were deeply religious and engaged in spiritual practices, but they also harbored intense paranoia about spirits invading their home. They sought guidance from a preacher, sharing their fears with him. Sherilyn was particularly concerned about spirits communicating with their daughter, Madison, who talked to an imaginary friend named Emily. This behavior was likely Madison's way of coping with the family's chaotic environment. Bobby, worried about spirits on their roof, inquired about special bullets to eliminate them. He also possessed a satanic Bible, intending to use it for exorcising spirits from their home. The Jamisons owned a storage container on their Eufaula property, intending to use it as temporary housing while building their new home on a mountain. The container attracted attention from neighbors due to the unusual graffiti Sherilyn, who claimed to be a witch, sprayed on it. She believed her black cats were being poisoned and accused neighbors of the act, causing discomfort and leading them to avoid the Jamisons. Sherilyn's desire for solitude ultimately aligned with the neighbors' inclination to keep their distance. Feeling uncomfortable in their neighborhood and seeking a fresh start to possibly save their marriage, the Jamesons showed interest in a remote piece of land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from their home. On October 7, 2009, the family set out in their truck to see the land but got lost and stopped to ask for directions. Deciding to return home, they ventured back to the mountains the next day. The Jamisons, being a private family, often went weeks without contact with friends or relatives, so it wasn't unusual for them to be out of touch for over a week. On top of this, the family had informed Madison's school that they would be withdrawing her, as they were moving away, hence why the school never asked after her. 8 days after anyone had last seen or heard from the Jamisons on the 8th, hunters reported an abandoned truck on the top of Panola Mountain and reported it to police, who determined that it belonged to the Jamisons. The truck was locked, and it appeared that all of the family's possessions, including their dog Maisie, were inside. Maisie was miraculously still alive, but extremely malnourished, having not eaten for a number of days. Authorities freed Maisie from the truck, bringing her to live with Bobby's mother. When authorities began investigating the mysterious disappearance of the Jamison family, they learned that on October 8, 2009,
44-year-old Bobby, 40-year-old Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, were last seen by a man living in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. This sole witness informed the authorities that he saw only the family and no one else in the area during that time. At the time, the county sheriff told the press that the witness was a landowner in the Red Oak area and that they had searched the area but found no clues. Officially, the Jamisons were near this area to view a 16-hectare plot they intended to buy. Strangely, they planned to live on this land in a storage container they already owned on their property in Eufaula. Police discovered several personal belongings in the truck, including cell phones, Sherilyn's purse, and Bobby's wallet in the family's truck. Believing the family might be lost in the dense and treacherous woodlands of Panola Mountain, authorities utilized the GPS data from Bobby and Sherilyn's cell phones to trace their movements. The GPS trail led them up a hill where they found small footprints, presumably belonging to Madison. At the hill's summit, a photo of Madison was discovered on the cell phone belonging to Bobby. The picture sparked varying interpretations of her emotional state. Some observers suggested she looked on the verge of laughter, while others perceived her as close to tears. The theory emerged that someone other than her parents might have taken the photo, given her lack of smile and seemingly uncomfortable body language. However, the photo's significance as evidence is debatable, as discerning Madison's thoughts or feelings from the image is challenging. It's argued that a 6-year-old would likely not hide fear or fret, so if she felt intimidated by the photographer, her expression would probably clearly reflect fear, which is not evident in the photo. Authorities estimated that the family spent approximately 15 minutes at the mountain's peak before returning to their truck. This moment marks the beginning of the mystery, as their subsequent actions and whereabouts remain unknown. The following day, a large-scale search operation was launched, involving over 100 law enforcement personnel, volunteers, search dogs, and helicopters, but the family was not found. Further investigation of the truck revealed several intriguing clues. Hidden under the front seat was a bag containing $32,000 in cash. Additionally, an 11-page letter written by Sherilyn filled with hostility and hatred towards Bobby, was discovered. The letter conveyed Sherilyn's feelings of neglect and indifference from Bobby towards his family. She criticized him for being a recluse and for not valuing his family, highlighting the strained dynamics within the household. Parallel to the on-site investigation, police followed essential steps in any missing persons investigation. They spoke with the couple's family and close circles, where they learned that the Jamisons had some peculiar traits. Friends reported that the family had begun acting strangely, and both Bobby and Sherilyn had lost a significant amount of weight before disappearing. The sheriff at the time speculated that the family might have been involved in drugs. Although no evidence of this was found, there were also references to the couple's erratic behavior, seen moving objects to the vehicle in a way that seemed robotic or trance-like. Unfortunately, questioning those close to the couple only confirmed their atypical nature, but shed no light on the family's whereabouts. As months and then years passed without further leads, the case remained unsolved. The next discovery related to the case occurred in 2013, again reported by hunters. This finding would at least partially resolve the mystery of the Jamison family's disappearance. The hunters found the remains of 3 bodies, belonging to 2 adults and a child. The discovery of the remains occurred near where the Jamisons' vehicle was found in 2009, leading many to believe they belonged to the missing family. However, confirmation was needed. At the time, the sheriff was asked by journalists why the bodies were not found in 2009, despite the intensive search and the use of tracking dogs. She speculated that the bodies might have been covered by falling leaves, which could have caused rescuers to overlook them. Bobby's paternal uncle was the first family member to speak with the media. He explained that while it wasn't definitive that the remains were his nephew and his family, all evidence pointed to them. He had been contacted by the FBI about the discovery and said he had no hope that the family was still alive 4 years after their disappearance. For him, finding the bodies provided closure. Although it was sad because the reasons for their fate were unknown, he found it particularly painful that an innocent child had met such an undeserved end. Meanwhile, authorities warned that the process of identifying the bodies would take time. The county sheriff's office, the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the state medical examiner's office searched the area, but found no evidence to help identify the remains, as they reported in a joint statement. The spokesperson for the medical examiner's office said they received the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child, and announced they would use pathological, anthropological, and forensic methods to determine if the remains belonged to the Jamison family. She clarified that identification could take days or even years, depending on the condition and preservation of the remains. Many months later, on July 3, 2014, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to the Jamison family. The forensic analysis of the bodies revealed no soft tissues, only partial skeletal remains due to significant scavenger and rodent activity at the site. Despite this, the bodies appeared to have been placed side by side and face down. Skulls were present, and although a small hole was found in Bobby's skull, possibly caused by a bullet, the state of decomposition meant the medical examiner could not determine a definitive cause of death. Since the Jamisons' disappearance, 5 theories have been publicized to explain their deaths, but none have been confirmed. The first theory suggests an accident, pointing to weather reports in the area at the time showing temperatures of around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the days following their disappearance, the area experienced heavy rains, but not enough to cause death. The bodies were found only 4 kilometers from their truck, raising the possibility that the family got lost in the woods and died of hypothermia and exposure. However, this doesn't explain why their truck was left as if they intended to return soon. The second theory proposes a scenario of murder followed by a suicide decision. It was known that both Bobby and Sherilyn suffered extreme stress throughout their lives. 11-page long letter was found in their truck, in which Sherilyn expressed her resentment towards Bobby, accusing him of being a hermit. Another letter found in their family home was said to mention death. Although Sherilyn's mother stated that writing such letters was common for her due to her bipolar condition, Sherilyn's gun was also missing from the car. This raised the question of whether Sherilyn could have walked 4 kilometers with her family to kill them and then take her own life. Police also investigated the theory that the Jamison family's deaths were a murder-suicide, but not by Sherilyn, instead by Bobby. According to this hypothesis, Bobby might have read his wife's resentful letter and decided to end everyone's lives. However, this theory weakens with the evidence, as no weapon was found near the bodies. This does not rule out the possibility of death by poison or other means. It's also unclear why they would have traveled so far from the truck to end their lives, especially since Bobby had mobility issues in his own home due to his injuries. The scenario of him walking 4 kilometers through mountainous terrain seemed improbable. Moreover, this does not explain why they were found lying face down, side by side. The third theory involves Bobby's father, 67-year-old Bob Dean Jamison, as responsible for the murders. It was revealed that in early 2009, about 6 months before the family disappeared, that Bobby had filed for a protective order against his father. He described his father as a dangerous man who thought he was above the law and had connections with prostitutes, gang members, and methamphetamine trafficking. Bobby also claimed that his father had threatened to kill him and his family on 2 separate occasions, once in November 2008 and again in April 2009. Bobby feared for their lives as his father had once hit him with a vehicle. Bobby had been involved in a dispute with his father, which resulted in Bob removing everyone except Madison from his will. The dispute stemmed from disagreements over a supposed deal between them. Bobby claimed he worked at his father's service station for free, under the understanding that he would inherit half of the business. But his father later said that agreement never existed. However, Bob died just 2 months after the Jamisons' disappearance and had been ill for some time. His brother Jack stated that Bob was either in a hospital or a nursing home at the time of the incident, and added that, although Bob was a disturbed person, he was not capable of being involved in the murders. The fourth theory is that the Jamisons were killed by a cult. Sherilyn's mother believed that the Jamisons were murdered by a religious cult in southeastern Oklahoma. According to her, the cult had violent members and had put Sherilyn on a blacklist. However, she never named a specific cult, and no evidence has been found to support this theory. It has also been suggested that the Jamisons practiced witchcraft. Reports indicated that a witch's Bible was found in the family's home. However, Sherilyn's best friend Nikki stated that the supposed satanic book was purchased solely for the purpose of a prank. Yet, Bobby's spiritual advisor mentioned that Bobby had confessed to reading the satanic Bible. This raises several questions about the theory of a cult-related murder. Why were the bodies found deep in the forest, and how did they get there? Were they forced to walk at gunpoint, or were they taken there after being killed? Transporting bodies 4 kilometers through dense forest would be challenging, suggesting the involvement of more than one perpetrator. The fifth theory relates to drug issues. Rumors suggested that Bobby's parents were involved in illicit substance trafficking, and some suspected that the family was involved in a drug deal gone wrong. The Jamisons' aforementioned strange behavior could be explained by drug influence. However, former sheriff stated that there was no evidence to support the theory of drug use or trafficking by the couple. Many have pointed out that Bobby and Sherilyn were good parents and would not have taken Madison with them if they were involved in a drug-related event. The fact that the bodies were found aligned and face down could suggest an execution-style murder. If so, was it premeditated? Who knew they would be in that remote mountain area at that time? And what was the motive? Alternatively, they might have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen and were silenced. But again, why were they taken so deep into the forest? For time, when revisiting the case to find closure and a responsible party, a particular detail emerged. The bottle found in the Jamisons' vehicle. It was determined to belong to a former guest at the family's house who had been expelled for being the white supremacist. Sherilyn, who had Native American ancestry, had reportedly expelled him at gunpoint only a month before the disappearance. The dispute arose because the individual, whose identity remains confidential, expressed beliefs that all non-white people needed to die. While he seemed to have a motive for revenge, he provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect by the FBI. Rumors then circulated that the Jamisons were on the blacklist of a white supremacist group known as the United White Knights. The mountains where they disappeared were known as a hotbed for far-right extremists, and near where the Jamisons' truck was found, a vandalized car was covered with racist slogans. Sherilyn had supposedly been part of the group's missions, but had rewritten the messages with religious words of peace and love. Although white supremacists are active in the area, no concrete evidence has been produced to support their involvement in the case. Ultimately, all the theories remain speculative. To this date, what happened to the Jamisons on October 8, 2009, remains unknown, and unless someone who knows the truth comes forward, it will continue to be an unresolved mystery with limitless theories but very few answers. Guayaquil, the capital of the Guayas province, is one of the largest cities in Ecuador. Located on a peninsula by the Guayas River, it serves as the country's commercial hub. Known as the gateway to the Pacific beaches and the famous Galapagos Islands, Guayaquil is also a major port and center for imports and exports. It's the second most populated city in Ecuador, after Quito, with a rough estimate of 2.7 million inhabitants. Approximately 400,000 of these residents live in Guasmo Sur, one of the informal neighborhoods in the southern central part of the city. Guasmo Sur is considered the poorest neighborhood in Guayaquil. It struggles with overpopulation, poverty, and frequent criminal activities. Most of its current inhabitants are migrants from rural areas who moved to this urban but isolated part of Guayaquil seeking better employment opportunities and an improved quality of life. The majority of the buildings in Guasmo Sur are made of blocks, yet some houses are constructed with wood, cardboard, and other common materials. The area was named Guasmo because of the once abundant tropical trees of the same name, which were later felled to pave the way for urban development and local industries. In 2018, 19-year-old Kathleen Alexandra Leana resided in Guasmo Sur. Her residence was owned by Ramiro Alta Morando. According to him, it wasn't profitable to rent out one of his ground floor spaces for businesses, as tenants frequently failed and returned the keys. As a result, he decided to remodel the commercial space into a residential apartment. The first tenants arrived on August 9, 2018. A family consisting of a mother and her 4 children, with Kathleen Leana being the oldest daughter. He lived on the upper floor of the same building. Relatives and neighbors of Kathleen Leana described her as a calm girl with no signs of violent tendencies. By October 2018, Kathleen was working because she had applied for a university spot, which she unfortunately did not secure. Less than 5 kilometers away from Guasmo Sur lies Isla Trinitaria, an area crisscrossed by the perimeter road and also plagued with security issues. Isla Trinitaria has a predominantly Afro-descended population, with many of their homes being built on illegally acquired land and constructed with cement and cane. In Isla Trinitaria, 21-year-old Veronica Jasmine Silva Ruiz lived in the southern part of the main port. Veronica Silva was studying systems engineering at the University of Guayaquil and was about to begin her second semester. She lived with her parents and siblings, being the youngest daughter of Alberto Silva and Maria Ruiz. Many claimed that Veronica and Kathleen Leana had been friends since school days, but Veronica's mother was unaware of this relationship and did not know Kathleen. However, it's confirmed that both young women shared two things in common. They were neighbors and both knew Herbo Works, a 20-year-old man. Maria Ruiz, Veronica's mother, also didn't know about the alleged romantic relationship her daughter had with Jer, who had also been Kathleen Leana's romantic partner. On the morning of Tuesday, October 2, 2018, Veronica left her home early. By 9 a.m., she bid her parents farewell, heading to the University of Guayaquil. That was the last time they saw her alive. Her mother mentioned that Veronica went to the university without breakfast as she needed to submit a document and intended to return home quickly for lunch. Her father mentioned expecting her home around 11 a.m. When they didn't hear from her, her disappearance was reported to the prosecutor's office on the morning of Wednesday, October 3, 2018. 34 hours after Veronica's departure, her elder sister Rudy received a mysterious friend request on Facebook. A 20-year-old man identified himself as Veronica's boyfriend, claiming he knew of Veronica's whereabouts since his ex-mother-in-law had shown him some of her personal belongings. These items were found in an apartment in Guasmosur, which belonged to Kathleen Leana. Rudy informed her parents about this Facebook conversation, and they went to the flagrancy unit of the state prosecutor's office that Wednesday night to report the information. Around 7 p.m., investigators from the National Department of Crimes Against Life, Violent Deaths, Disappearances, Extortion, and Kidnapping confirmed that the body they had discovered dismembered at 2 p.m. that same day matched the family's descriptions. Initially, it was believed that Veronica never went to the university that day, but had been lured to Kathleen Leana's apartment, located 6 blocks from where they found Veronica's dismembered body.
Leana allegedly called Veronica to gossip about her boyfriend, who had previously been Leana's partner and, according to Leana, was still secretly seeing her. Later, it was confirmed that Veronica did attend the university on the morning of October 2, 2018, as she had told her parents. This account was
Corroborated by a university professor and later shared with agents from the National Department of Crimes Against Life, Violent Deaths, Disappearances, Extortion, and Kidnapping when they were investigating the disappearance. Veronica Silva was last seen at the university with a young woman believed to be Kathleen Leana and a young man. Their identities could not be confirmed as the faculty's security cameras were offline. By the afternoon of Wednesday, October 13, 2018, Veronica Silva's body was discovered inside 2 black bags placed within plastic boxes on a tricycle in Guasmosur. Bystanders, upon discovering the human remains, alerted the authorities. The tricycle was seized for investigation. At 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 3, Kathleen Leana confessed to the murder. "I cut her in half," she informed the police. Her account of the crime was harrowing. Kathleen claimed she had invited Veronica Silva to her home on Tuesday, October 2, under the pretext of gossip. In reality, she wanted to confront her about the relationship Veronica allegedly had with Kathleen's ex-boyfriend. The two were supposedly still seeing each other secretly, and he had proposed to Veronica. When Veronica tried to leave, Kathleen threatened her with a knife. Kathleen tied Veronica's arms behind her back with plastic and began strangling her with an electrical cord. According to Kathleen, Veronica pleaded to be let go. There were moments Kathleen would relent, only to tighten the cord again. At some point, Veronica attempted to grab a knife, resulting in a struggle on the floor where Kathleen eventually strangled Veronica to death. After the murder, Kathleen tried to dismember the body with a kitchen knife but couldn't sever the head. She attempted to burn the face with alcohol, succeeding only in burning Veronica's hair and face. With family due home soon, Kathleen hid the body beneath her bed, covering it with stuffed animals and sheets. Disturbingly, she slept that night with Veronica's body still under the bed. On Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen decided to incinerate the body but failed. She placed the body parts in bags and sought out her uncle, Jose Rodriguez, to borrow his work tricycle. Initially hesitant, he eventually lent it to her. When she delayed returning it, he went to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Kathleen later told him the tricycle had been stolen, but he discovered from colleagues that the police had confiscated it due to its involvement in a death. Kathleen also admitted to asking a passerby for help loading the heavy bags onto the tricycle. After placing Veronica's remains on the tricycle, Kathleen paid a minor cousin $5 to help her push the tricycle towards a garbage dump, with the boy unaware of the gruesome contents within the bags. 5 blocks away from Kathleen's house, one of the bags fell off the tricycle. Panicking, Kathleen fled when a security guard approached her for littering. Ramiro, the owner of the building where the murder occurred, reported never hearing any alarming noises or cries from upstairs. He only noticed a strong scent, similar to chicken blood. Considering that chickens are frequently slaughtered in the area, he dismissed the smell, not thinking it came from a human body or his own building. In fact, he even considered confronting them about a potential spill, but his wife advised against it. That night, over 10 police officers raided his house. Upon surrendering to the police, Kathleen Leana claimed she acted alone. However, investigators were suspicious there might be other accomplices. Veronica's mother, Maria Ruiz, also doubted Kathleen's solitary involvement, pointing out her daughter's height and strength. Given Kathleen's story, the primary theory presented by the National Department of Crimes Against Life, violent deaths, disappearances, extortion, and kidnapping, was that of a crime of passion stemming from jealousy. Specifically, it was believed to revolve around a presumed love triangle involving Veronica Silva, Kathleen Leana, and Jair Alexander. It's noteworthy that Veronica's mother had never heard of these individuals before. Later, Kathleen changed her account, implicating Jair in the crime. She alleged that Jair was prostituting them via a website and participated in Veronica's murder by holding the electrical cord used for strangulation. According to the attorney representing Veronica's family, the young university student was murdered for refusing to engage in prostitution via a website supposedly run by Jair. In September 2019, Kathleen Leana was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison for the murder and dismemberment of Veronica Silva in October 2018. Kathleen's defense appealed the ruling, considering it unjust. In October 2020, an appeal hearing was held, conducted virtually due to the coronavirus pandemic. The presiding judge denied the defense's claims, who now argued Kathleen had only discarded the body, not committed the murder. The verdict against Kathleen Leana included a fine of 1,000 basic salaries to the state and a $20,000 compensation to the victim's mother. During a hearing at the prosecutor's General State Flagrancy Unit, Kathleen Leana's defense requested a psychological evaluation for their client and proposed for transfer to a psychological care institution instead of the Female Social Rehabilitation Center where she had been sent. The forensic clinical psychologist stated that Kathleen might exhibit psychopathic traits and signs of schizophrenia. However, since she acted with clear intent and conscience, she wasn't exempt from legal responsibility. She had meticulously planned everything, showing premeditation and malice when committing the crime. Before becoming the center of attention, Yoder told the public prosecutor's office that he had known Kathleen Leanna for 3 years and had a romantic relationship with her for 2 years. He mentioned ending the relationship due to her possessive nature, recalling an instance where she threatened him with scissors, warning him not to message any female friends. Yoder also reported that on Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen called him asking if he had a machete. When he inquired about its purpose, she claimed it was to clear some shrubs outside her house. Later that afternoon, he received a message from Kathleen saying she needed to leave as someone was looking to kill her. This was the account Yoder shared with the public prosecutor before becoming a prime suspect himself. Not long after, the police sought him out for questioning. Veronica Silva's mother acknowledged that while nothing could bring her daughter back, she took solace in knowing that her daughter's killer would serve a significant sentence for the heinous act. To her, justice had been served. She emphasized the need to apprehend Yoder, who was on the run, and also who she believed also had a hand in her daughter's murder. On October 6, 2018, Veronica Silva's funeral was held. Her head was adorned with a white lace crown, making her look like a sleeping maiden. During the funeral, the song Amor Eterno by Juan Gabriel played. Her mother was inconsolable, speaking to Veronica through the glass of the casket, pleading for her to look back. Maria's grief was palpable, screaming as she refused to let go of her daughter. It was a loss she would never overcome, forever scarring her life. Maria repeatedly expressed that her daughter, a calm and peaceful young woman, didn't deserve such a brutal, horrific end. After all, who does? In September 2021, the National Police confirmed the arrest of Yoder Alexander Boorks Bastidis. He is believed to be the second individual involved in the murder of his girlfriend. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979, in Stockton-on-Tees, a trading town situated on the banks of the River Tees. At that time, it was part of the extinct county of Cleveland, later reassigned the county of Durham in England. She was the daughter of Deborah and Anthony Glass and had an older sister named Claire, who was a year older than her. Vicky entered the world prematurely, weighing less than 3.3 pounds, and both her life and her mother's were in danger. Eventually, Vicky's parents separated, and when she was 6 years old, her mother remarried Colin Goodall, a man also living in Stockton-on-Tees. This new union gave the young girl an additional stepsister named Cheryl, who was older than her, and a younger brother named Thomas. From that point on, Vicky lived with them. Vicky had light skin, light brown eyes, and long hair, a look she maintained from childhood into adolescence when she decided to cut her hair. Despite being born with a hearing impairment, music was Vicky's passion, and she considered herself a huge fan of Michael Jackson. Her musical inclination led her to join the local jazz band at a very young age. Clearly, she was a determined young lady. She remained with the group from the ages of 13 to 18, during which time she always enjoyed the trips they took to perform in various places. According to her acquaintances, she felt proud when she performed. Vicky also had a deep love for animals, particularly cats. In fact, she rescued one which she named Sooty. Vicky attended Blakestone High School, also located in Stockton-on-Tees, and had a keen interest in running and sports in general. However, she was very diligent and never neglected her studies. Later on, she secured a job at a local factory in Teesside. While some people who knew her saw Vicky as a quiet and somewhat shy girl, her family and closest friends knew her to be very cheerful. They said she had a heart of gold and was very affectionate. She was indeed a much-loved person who seemingly had everything and lived in a healthy and happy environment. Unfortunately, her life took a dramatic turn when she was nearing her 18th birthday. According to her mother, she began associating with the wrong crowd and started using drugs. The young woman became addicted to heroin and became so dependent on narcotics that she started offering sex services to support her addiction, eventually leading her to leave her home. Over time, Vicky began frequenting the suburbs of Middlesbrough, about 8 kilometers to the east of Stockton-on-Tees, particularly a truck parking lot where transport companies used to park their vehicles overnight. By December 1999, Vicky had developed a chest condition and was homeless. Through a friend, she met a man who lived in Middlesbrough, who offered her shelter while she recovered her health. The homeowner took care of her, and the place became her permanent residence. He assisted her in scheduling her medical appointments and ensured she didn't miss them. Despite the man's efforts to help the girl heal and improve her life, she continued with her addiction to illegal substances and continued offering her services as a sex worker. In the year 2000, Vicky continued with the same lifestyle, and so her 21st birthday arrived on September 21. Unfortunately, the joy quickly turned into tragedy. According to case reports, on that Thursday night, the young woman worked and also celebrated. Apparently, Friday, the 22nd, passed without incident, and by Saturday, the 23rd, Vicky went to her home in the company of a friend to change clothes. Around noon, both of them left the place. Hours later, past midnight, Vicky met with a client on Borough Road, located in the center of Middlesbrough. They then went to 104 Princes Road, a place frequented by drug users and sex workers. She was dressed in a white shirt, light gray pants, and white sneakers. Some time later, the young woman and her client took a taxi down on Union Street and went back to this male's home in Norton, Stockton. After spending some time there, Vicky called a taxi line she often used. The driver picked her up at around 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24, and about 20 minutes later, he dropped her off in Middlesbrough, specifically at the junction of Union Street and Eshwood Square. This is just to the rear on a pub that was then called the Shipmate. As soon as the taxi driver dropped the woman off at the designated destination, he returned to the headquarters of the taxi company he worked for. That night, and in the following days, Vicky did not return to her house. Her friend, the man who had helped her when she needed it most, became worried as her absence prolonged. He started asking about her at all the places she frequented. Since no one could provide information about her whereabouts, he decided to contact the police to report her as missing. In the same month, a man named Sean Tooley was arrested. His arrest was related to the asphyxiation death of a 20-year-old woman named Kelly Mallinson, who also engaged in sex work to finance her addiction and frequented the same places Vicky did. Tooley was sentenced to life in prison a year later. On Friday, November 3, 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance, a man who was walking dogs made a gruesome discovery on a trail in the town of Danby, a picturesque village located in the North Yorkshire. Around 6 in the morning, the man came across the naked and decomposed corpse of a woman. Immediately, amidst his shock, the citizen notified the police. The remains were taken to the coroner's office, where experts determined that it was Vicky. Due to the state of the remains, pathologists concluded that she had been exposed to the moorland winds for several weeks. Although they couldn't establish the cause of her death, they stated that there appeared to be no wounds and no signs of abuse, sexual or otherwise, nor any indication that she had died from drowning. Officials who arrived at the scene searched the area surrounding where Vicky's body was found for clues and tried to locate the victim's clothing, but their efforts yielded no results. Cleveland and North Yorkshire police officers initiated investigations. A team of 40 officers tried to reconstruct the unfortunate young woman's last steps during the night of September 23 and the early hours of September 24. They interviewed both the taxi driver and the employees of the places Vicky frequented, as well as the friend who had given her shelter and some witnesses and colleagues. Sergeant Brian Dunn, who was leading the investigation at that time, made several public appeals for assistance from the community. They needed someone to provide information that could be useful in catching the perpetrator. Vicky's family was devastated by the tragic death of the young woman. On that day, when her mother returned from work, the police were at her house. Her initial reaction was to ask if they had found her daughter and if she was okay, but when she received the news, she began to tremble. Until that moment, she was convinced that her daughter would reappear alive, and every contact she had with the police involved asking if they would help Vicky get off drugs once they found her. On November 13, Vicky's mother, Deborah, lashed out at the press for labeling her daughter as a drug addict. She emphasized that this fact was irrelevant and that the important thing was that she was a 21-year-old girl who had lost her life in a brutal manner. The following week, posters with Vicky's photograph were placed in various locations, especially in the places where the girl had been on the night she disappeared. In that same month of November, the police reported that they had spoken to more than 500 people and had taken statements from 150, including former clients of the young woman, taxi drivers, neighbors, and truck drivers. They also analyzed over 60 hours of closed-circuit camera recordings located in the areas the victim used to frequent. November was passing when Vicky's father, Anthony, and her stepfather, Colin, went together to the site where the lifeless body of the girl was found. On that day, Deborah's absence was notable, but the mother was too affected to participate in the ceremony. In addition to placing flowers, they prayed for any clues or information that would lead to the truth about what had happened. Anthony sent a plea to members of the community to help them find closure. In doing so, he stressed that they only needed a phone call to end the nightmare they were living, not knowing what had happened to their daughter. The investigation focused on the hundreds of truck drivers who used to frequent the parking lot in Middlesbrough. As part of the inquiries, a 39-year-old married man was arrested, but his identity was never revealed. Eventually, his connection to the case was ruled out, and he was released. In January 2002, the investigators in charge of the case arrested a 47-year-old unmarried man, identified as Eric Coates, who resided in North Yorkshire. This was the third time officials had interviewed him in relation to the case, as he had been unable to provide a credible alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky disappeared. The agents found it suspicious that he couldn't remember certain details precisely. The man admitted that he had been with sex workers, but denied any involvement in Vicky's death. He also revealed that 1 or 2 girls had mentioned to him that the crime was related to a drug debt settlement. His house, which he shared with his parents, was searched by the police, as were other properties belonging to his family. During the searches, officers seized computer equipment, clothing, diaries, videotapes, and a vehicle. Additionally, this individual had a criminal record. He had been arrested and imprisoned for 15 months in 1994 for unlawfully restraining and assaulting a sex worker in Middlesbrough. However, he was acquitted of charges of attempted sexual assault and indecent assault against the same woman. Ultimately, it was determined that Eric had nothing to do with Vicky's crime, and he was released. His father, a former county councillor in North Yorkshire, stated that they were as interested as the police in finding out who had taken the young woman's life. Years later, in 2006, Eric was imprisoned and sentenced to 14 years for pleading guilty to 15 sexual offenses against girls aged between 11 and 14 years. In this context, it was also revealed that his father had faced 12 charges of sexual offenses, but was not brought to trial due to health reasons. Returning to 2002, in July, Cleveland police questioned a man identified as John Taylor, who was serving a life sentence after pleading guilty to the kidnapping and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The investigations into Jean also yielded no results, and he was ruled out as a suspect in the attack on Vicky. In December 2006, detectives from Cleveland police reported that they had contacted their colleagues in Suffolk to explore possible connections between
Vicky's case and the tragic deaths of 5 other sex workers. For these crimes, truck driver Steve Wright had been arrested, and 2 years later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, the authorities in Cleveland ruled out any connection of the man with the death. When the tragedy reached its 10-year mark, Vicky's parents
visited the place where their daughter was found lifeless and placed flowers in her honor. Deborah told reporters that she thought of her daughter every day and that it was a pain that would never go away. In December 2010, the case file was once again examined, searching for possible links, such as a man identified as Stephen Griffiths, who had taken the lives of 3 sex workers in Bradford, West Yorkshire, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, at the beginning of January 2011, any possible connection to Vicky's disappearance was ruled out. For the family, the pain of loss was compounded by the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her and the belief that the person responsible for her death remained at large. Vicky's grandmother, who was very close to the girl, was deeply affected and passed away a year later. Her mother, Deborah, passed away in 2015 at the age of 55 without ever getting to know the person who took her daughter's life. Anthony later admitted that during the first 24 months after the tragedy, he couldn't work and lost his job. He confessed that he couldn't smile, and it took him a long time to regain belief in himself and convince himself that it wasn't his fault. In 2017, the Cleveland police requested a grant to fund 3 separate historic cases in the vicinity of Middlesbrough. A year later, the Home Office agreed to provide approximately £3.7 million, about $4.6 million at the current exchange rate, to fund the Historic Investigation Unit aimed at thoroughly reviewing unsolved cases. In addition to Vicky's case, officials also reopened the cases of Donna Keogh, who disappeared in 1998 at the age of 17, and Rachel Wilson, who disappeared in 2002, with her body being located in a ditch 10 years later. There were some similarities in these cases, such as the age and occupation of the victims, and the fact that all 3 occurred in Middlesbrough. In October 2018, a website published information that rekindled hopes of uncovering the truth about Vicky's death. The news referred to a high-profile convicted offender. The inmate had been a taxi driver and was responsible for ending the life of a 22-year-old office worker who went missing in March 2011, and her remains were found in a grave. According to the media report, at the time of his arrest, the man confessed to the murder of another young woman, age 20, committed 8 years earlier, and he provided information about the location of the body. However, no connection between the criminal and Vicky's case could be established. In September 2021, the police announced that they had significant new lines of investigation regarding the unsolved case. In this context, they made a fresh public appeal, urging anyone who knew any details about what might have happened to Vicky in 2000 to contact the authorities. The officers expressed hope because they now had more modern forensic techniques and plans to interview potential witnesses and examine over 2,000 hours of CCTV footage. During this time, one of the detectives on the case mentioned that in the preceding 12 months, a lot of work had been done on Vicky's case. He explained that a detailed review of the original investigation had resulted in 300 recommendations, with the primary one being to initiate a new investigation, leveraging advancements in forensic science. In the same year, the case of Rachel, mentioned earlier, was closed with the arrest of a 62-year-old man identified as Keith Hall, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison. In 2022, the investigators leading the case appealed to the community to collaborate by providing any information that could be helpful in solving the mystery surrounding Vicky's death. They were particularly interested in identifying the truck driver who was seen with the young woman hours before her disappearance. To achieve this goal, they released CCTV images in which Vicky is seen walking with a man in a parking lot on the night of her disappearance. And later, she is seen conversing with a truck driver to whom she may have left some of her belongings. This latter man was described as an individual with white skin, broad shoulders, aged between 34 and 38, and having a distinctive mark on his face. The police also launched a website with Vicky's name in an effort to gather information about the case. As part of these initiatives, detectives spoke with hundreds of people, and while they collected a significant amount of information, the identity of the truck driver remains unknown. That year, the family issued a statement reaffirming their deep love for Vicky and the difficult times they were going through. They emphasized that Deborah, Vicky's mother, passed away without answers, knowing that the person who took her daughter's life was still on the streets. On November 3, 2023, 23 years had passed since Vicky's lifeless body was found, and the investigation to find the person responsible for her death is one of the most extensive in the history of Cleveland police in England. Each year that goes by without justice is another year of suffering for the relatives of Vicky Glass, who would be 44 years old today. The police stated that in order to provide closure to the family, they need the support of the community. They are confident that someone out there possesses the missing piece to solve the puzzle and expressly called on that person to come forward to the authorities to help uncover the truth. On September 27, 2020, police and several neighbors from the Florencio del Castillo community were attempting to locate a young woman named Alison Bomilla, who had been missing for more than 5 months. They headed to an illegal dump located in San Jeronimo de Caxia in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. The first thing they spotted was a sock and a shoe, inside of which was a nail. Yendri, Alison's mother, instantly identified the clothing and even recognized the nail. Due to the nail polish color that had been applied at her nail salon, they're failing to find any more remains of the young woman. The search party withdrew, disheartened, but not defeated. The next day, they returned to the area and ventured down to a nearby coffee plantation, located 93 meters deep into the illegal dumping ground. What they found left them completely stunned. Buried beneath the soil, moss and weeds were skeletal remains of the young woman, including vertebrae, ribs, parts of her upper limbs, pelvic bones, and a femur connected by cartilage. 8 meters from that site, they discovered a piece of fabric belonging to the pants Alison was wearing the day she disappeared. A little further away, they found a second shoe and part of an arm. It appeared that the mysterious neighbor who had provided this information had not lied. The event had been as horrific as he had described. But how did all this happen? Alison Pamela Bomilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001 in the city of Cartago, Costa Rica. When she was very young, her parents divorced and she went to live with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. They moved to the Florencio del Castillo community in the town of Ujeras. Despite her family's modest economic standing, Alison never lacked for anything. Growing up in a nurturing environment led her to become a highly sociable, friendly, and attentive young woman. Everyone who knew her adored her. She had an especially close relationship with her mother. They were like friends. Alison would even sometimes help her mother at her nail salon. At 18 years old, Alison led a quiet life. She attended night classes at a school which was several kilometers away from her home. In her town, It was common for young people to attend schools far from their communities, so walking through the streets was a routine part of her day. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend Harold Segura. Her days typically consisted of going from school to her boyfriend's house or meeting up with friends and family. However, this routine was shattered on March 4, 2020. At 5 p.m., Allison left her home wearing blue jeans, a white and mustard-colored blouse, and light-colored sneakers. She took a collective bus to go to the school and traveled the 5.5 kilometers to the institution with a friend. She arrived around 6 p.m. Only she said goodbye to her friend and decided to visit her aunt who lived nearby. She arrived at her aunt's house, but no one was home. She then went to her boyfriend's house, where she met his mother, and they chatted for a while. Eventually, Harold arrived, and they spent the rest of the afternoon together until he had to leave for an errand. Seeing that it was getting dark, Allison thought it would be best to leave as soon as possible and did not wait for her boyfriend to return to say goodbye. At 8 o'clock, Allison walked to the bus stop that would take her home to Florencio del Castillo. 10 minutes after boarding the bus, she received a text message from Harold, who was extremely worried. He told her it would have been better if she had waited for him to accompany her home. 40 minutes later, Allison got off at the bus stop closest to her home, but she still had a long distance to walk. The street was deserted, and the only light came from a few streetlights. Feeling somewhat anxious, Allison began the 1.6-kilometer walk to her home. She sent a message to her mother, Yendri, asking her to meet at a bridge 500 meters away from their house as they usually did. While walking, Allison noticed two men who appeared suspicious. They were heading in the same direction as her, so she quickened her pace and texted Harold, saying, "I was on the bus and just got off, and these two sketchy guys got off as well and are walking behind me. I'm going to speed up because I'm scared." Concerned, Harold advised her to take a taxi and promised to pay for it, but Allison declined. She texted him that she was close to the bridge where she was supposed to meet her mother. The men began to walk faster as if trying to catch up with her. When Yendri arrived at the meeting point, there was no sign of Allison. She repeatedly called her daughter's phone, but got no answer. Distraught, Yendri returned home, hoping that Allison might have taken an alternate route and had already arrived. Upon reaching home, she found it empty. The last time Allison had been online was at 8:40 p.m. Yendri tried to contact her again, but the messages went unanswered. The next day, she officially reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. The authorities began searching for clues to Allison's whereabouts. The first lead was security footage from a camera near the bridge where Allison was supposed to meet her mother. The tape showed her walking down the street toward her home, 8:47 p.m., at some point quickening her pace before disappearing into the darkness. There were no further traces of her after that. The following day, the Judicial Investigation Organization and the Ministry of Public Security joined the search. They examined various places close to the locality, including a lake and a nearby hydroelectric dam. The case drew the attention of the community, who decided to assist the authorities in the search. While investigating the streets near Allison's home, they discovered an object that caught their attention: a pair of plasters lying on the ground. This development was strange because the police had already searched the same area on the first day and found no trace of Allison. Someone seemed to be attempting to mislead them. On March 11th, a local resident came to the police station to share something suspicious he had seen on the day of Allison's disappearance. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighbor observed Allison walking briskly down the street near the bridge. A wine-colored BMW was parked nearby and started to follow her, gradually increasing its speed before stopping in front of her. Allison spoke for a few seconds with the person inside the car and then got in. The car then sped away at high speed. Upon hearing the neighbor's account, the police took immediate action to locate the vehicle. They searched all the houses near Allison's residence. On March 25th, they found the car in one of these homes. On March 29th, the Judicial Investigation Organization announced that they had seized the car for DNA testing. They also revealed that an investigation was underway against the car's owner, a man named Nelson Sanchez Urena. The 28-year-old man was known in the neighborhood for being extremely reclusive. He hardly spoke to anyone, and when he did, he was not friendly. Locals said he came from a somewhat strange family about which not much was known. One even speculated that he was involved with regional gangs. While the police continued to gather evidence to warrant the arrest of Sanchez Urena, now, the prime suspect in Allison's disappearance, another significant event occurred. On April 4th, an employee of a store near the area found Allison's identification card. This was the second item belonging to Allison that had mysteriously appeared. The search continued, with authorities believing they were getting closer to discovering Allison's whereabouts. On April 17th, the police confirmed that they had found significant clues related to Allison's disappearance in the seized car, although they did not disclose any further details. On May 1st, the Costa Rican Red Cross joined the search efforts for Allison. Despite more people joining the search team, her body still remained missing. In the following months, the police focused on investigating the prime suspect and gathering enough evidence to charge him. Finally, on September 2nd, the Judicial Investigation Organization ordered the arrest of Sanchez Urena. He was formally arrested at same day without resistance. 24 hours later, authorities revealed that they had found traces of blood in the trunk, the car that had been seized over 5 months ago. These traces were matched with DNA samples from Allison Bomia's family. The results confirmed that there was no doubt that Sanchez Urena had attacked the young woman inside his car. Realizing that there was no turning back, Sanchez Urena decided it was time to confess his crime. He requested a meeting with his lawyer to reconstruct the events for the police. On March 4th, 2020, Sanchez Urena was driving his car when he saw Allison walking quickly down the street. He offered her a ride home, claiming it was late and that 2 nearby strangers looked suspicious. Trusting him, Allison got into the car, but once inside, Sanchez Urena attacked her and forced her into the trunk of the vehicle. He then took her to a coffee plantation. Once there, he forced her out of the car and took her about 140 meters from the entrance of the property, where no one could hear them. After reaching the secluded spot, he struck her, causing an injury that left her unconscious. Blood splattered on the ground as he proceeded to assault her. After completing the horrific act, he walked back to where he had left his car, put Allison's body in the front seat, and tied her hands with a piece of cloth and adhesive tape. He then placed her back in the trunk of the car. Next, Sanchez Urena drove to an illegal dumping ground and took Allison, who was still unconscious, out of the trunk. Without hesitation, he threw the body into a coffee plantation approximately 450 meters deep to ensure that she would remain there undetected. The police subsequently ordered 6 months of preventive detention for the main suspect. That same day, they went to the illegal dumping ground to search for Allison's body. Dozens of volunteers who had been following the case on TV and were devastated by the news of her loss joined the search. On September 27, a sock and a shoe were found, which Allison's mother, Yendri, identified as belonging to her daughter. Inside the shoe was a nail that the mother instantly recognized, as she had painted it in her salon just days before her daughter's disappearance. The following day, a team of rescuers descended into a coffee plantation near the illegal dumping ground. Using safety ropes and specialized mountaineering equipment, they reached a depth of 93 meters where they found vertebrae, ribs, parts of the upper limbs, pelvis, and a femur connected by cartilage. These remains were covered in undergrowth, soil, and moss, some even fused to the ground. 8 meters from the previous site, a piece of fabric was found, belonging to the pants Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared. A second shoe and small bone fragments, which appeared to be part of an arm, were also discovered. They were unable to locate the young woman's skull. It may have rolled out of sight due to its shape. The remains were taken to a laboratory to verify if they match Allison's DNA. Forensic experts found that the body had fractures in the thoracic spine and ribs, which were consistent with the injuries caused by the fall, as described by the suspect. This indicated that they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Although Yendri, Allison's mother, was utterly devastated by the loss of her daughter, she found some solace in knowing that Sanchez Urena would spend the rest of his life in jail. During a press conference, Yendri's lawyers stated that they would do everything possible to ensure the murderer faced the full extent of the law, serving as many years in prison as possible. While they couldn't bring Allison back to life, they could seek justice on her behalf. As they awaited the start of the legal process, Allison's family held a funeral. On March 1, 2021, Sanchez was officially charged with homicide. On April 30, the criminal court ordered his trial and extended his pretrial detention by another 4 months to prevent any escape attempts. While the case had made significant progress, the most challenging part remained, gathering enough evidence to prove the act was premeditated. Yendri testified that Sanchez Urena had previous encounters with Allison. On one occasion, Allison had gone to pick up her cousins from the bus stop and met the suspect. The man offered them a ride home, which they accepted despite the awkward silence during the trip. Days later, Allison received a message on Facebook from Sanchez Urena asking if she disliked him. Allison replied that she didn't, as they had never spoken, and she didn't know him well enough to form an opinion. The man tersely acknowledged her response. This demonstrated a long-term obsession with Allison, as he even claimed to be deeply in love with her and envious of those she spent time with. However, during the trial, the defendant completely changed his version of events. He claimed innocence and said his previous statements were made under police pressure and torture. Nevertheless, there was no turning back. The body was found where he initially indicated, and DNA evidence in the car directly implicated him. Allison's family provided their testimony in a separate room, as they did not want to face the attacker. Despite this, Sanchez Urena continued to plead innocent. On the morning of August 18, 2021, he was officially sentenced to 18 years in prison for simple homicide. He was acquitted of the abuse charge due to the state in which Allison's body was found, making it impossible to prove. The family was dissatisfied with the sentence, calling for up to 35 years in prison, which is customary in such cases. The verdict was later annulled by the criminal chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and the case was reopened to determine if the crime involved premeditation. In November 2021, the appeals court rejected the family's claims and upheld the original sentence. As of today, the case remains open, and Allison's family is pushing for the crime to be reclassified as aggravated homicide and for a review of the sentence. Yendri, Allison's mother, has not only had to cope with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with cyberbullying. Dozens of people found her Facebook profile and posted messages on her wall, blaming her for Allison's death because she had allowed her daughter to walk alone at night. Local residents came forward in various meetings to say that it's entirely normal for young people in the region to walk long distances from bus stops to their homes. Allison's boyfriend has given several interviews, expressing his outrage over what happened. He mentioned that Allison had many dreams and goals, which Sanchez Urena took away from her. Despite this, he felt grateful for the 1 year and 10 months he had spent with her, stating that she will always be his angel and the best life partner he could have ever had. Although the investigation has technically closed, several questions remain. The family's lawyer has pointed out that it is quite strange for Sanchez Urena to have moved Allison's body to the bottom of a landfill without any help. There is also the mystery of who the men were who had been pursuing Allison on the day of her disappearance, which prompted her to get into the car of her former neighbor. After an audio message that Allison sent her boyfriend went viral, the public has one burning question. Did these two men have anything to do with Sanchez Urena's sinister plan? And if not, why were they following the young woman late at night? The trial concluded too quickly, leaving the family dissatisfied with the sentence. They hope that, in the future, such cases will receive the necessary attention so that all those involved face the appropriate penalties. In Kern County, there are many murders each year, but the murder of Yvette Pena in a Bakersfield motel caught the public's eye and became especially infamous. This tragic event occurred in 2011 and was shocking in its brutality. What made this case even more remarkable was the individual who confessed to the crime, a merciless man covered in tattoos. His chilling demeanor and the gruesome details of the murder captivated and horrified the community. Born on March 7, 1988, in Bakersfield, California, Jaime Osuna's early life unfolded in a tumultuous manner. His mother, Michelle, was just 19 years old at the time, while little is known about his father except that he was 21, rebellious, and undisciplined. Jaime's father displayed abusive tendencies toward Michelle from the start, even resorting to kicking her in the stomach while she was pregnant with Jaime. This cruel act left lasting harm on Jaime, even before he took his first breath. Some speculate that this incident may have contributed to Jaime's ear malformation and potentially impacted his brain development. Recognizing the abusive nature of her husband, Michelle made the courageous decision to divorce him. Soon afterward, she met Jeff, a man with whom she felt an instant connection, and it appeared that Jeff would step into the role of Jaime's new stepfather. Jaime's biological father, however, strongly opposed this development. Despite Michelle's desire to sever ties with him, he persisted in causing trouble. One fateful night, he threatened Jeff by holding a knife to his throat. Thankfully, the situation didn't escalate further. He was apprehended and a restraining order was issued. This marks the last mention of Jaime's biological father in his story. Shortly thereafter, Michelle married Jeff, and they began cohabiting with Jaime and his brother, who was 2 years Jaime's senior. This is where the story takes a dark and troubling turn. While Jeff desired Michelle, he seemed less enthusiastic about assuming the role of a stepfather. Regrettably, this resulted in a period of misery for Jaime, while his older brother was somewhat spared, having gone to live with their grandparents once they became aware of Jeff's abusive behavior. It remains unclear why Jaime wasn't also taken in by his grandparents, but it seems that they declined to care for him, leaving one to wonder why they would reject a 3-year-old child. It's important to note that Michelle also made the choice to prioritize her relationship with Jeff over the well-being of her 2 young sons. Jeff's abusive actions were well documented through accounts from Michelle, Jaime, and records from hospitals and law enforcement agencies. On one occasion, during a road trip with Michelle and Jaime secured in a baby carrier in the back seat, Jaime's crying provoked Jeff to a point where he began shouting at the child. Shockingly, he then threw the baby carrier out of the moving car. Fortunately, the baby carrier landed safely, and Jaime displayed no visible injuries. However, subsequent examinations revealed severe brain damage that could have resulted from this traumatic incident. Around the age of 5, another distressing incident marred Jaime's already tumultuous childhood. He accidentally spilled some juice on the floor, which infuriated Jeff. In a fit of anger, Jeff grabbed a belt and began to mercilessly beat the young boy. This time, Michelle intervened by calling the police. Jeff was subsequently arrested on charges of child cruelty due to the visible marks on Jamie's body. However, the charges were relatively lenient and, disconcertingly, Jeff returned home just 10 days later, with Michelle still standing by his side. Even after they had their own children, Jeff continued to mistreat Jamie, depriving him of proper meals and sometimes serving his food on the floor. Jaime increasingly felt like an outsider in his own home. Michelle, though aware of her past mistakes, found herself unable to rectify the deep-seated damage that had been done. At the age of 12, Jaime finally managed to escape the clutches of his abusive household and went to live with his grandparents. Everyone had come to realize that Jeff's mistreatment of Jamie would not cease. It was during this time that they began to notice the emotional numbness that had gripped Jaime from a tender age. Michelle described it as if his soul had been torn away, leaving him apathetic towards everything and everyone around him. This period marked the onset of Jaime's disturbing behavior. He began cooking animals in a nearby forest, and in the absence of anyone at home, subjected his own pet cat to chilling ordeals, locking it in the refrigerator and even the oven. He also turned to self-harm, as it seemed to be the only way for him to feel something, anything, in a world where he felt utterly numb. At the age of 15, Jaime took a dire turn when he brutally stabbed another boy, leaving him gravely wounded but fortunate to survive the ordeal. This criminal act led to Jaime's incarceration in a juvenile correctional facility, where he would spend the next 4 years. It was during this period that Michelle finally confronted the gravity of her irresponsibility toward Jaime, resulting in her decision to divorce Jeff. A few years later, Jeff met his demise due to a heart attack. Given his abusive history, it's conceivable that Jaime might have inflicted harm upon him if he had not passed away. On September 14, 2007, Jaime was released from prison at the age of 19. By this time, he had acquired a notorious reputation as a troublemaker, deeply entrenched in gang activities. He showed little interest in education or gainful employment, instead opting for a lifestyle characterized by revelry and association with his gang affiliates. The turning point in this harrowing narrative occurred in December 2008 when a 16-year-old boy's birthday party took a rather unexpected turn. This was no typical birthday celebration adorned with Mickey Mouse piñatas and cheerful decorations. Instead, it drew a crowd from the gritty underbelly of society, and the absence of any responsible adult to maintain order was notable. This unconventional gathering had been organized by the birthday boy's mother, who was known for her laissez-faire attitude. Joelle Castellano, a 37-year-old single mother of 3, played a central role in this intriguing tale. She decided to host a party for underage youths, which, while undoubtedly irresponsible, didn't spell the end of the world. As the evening progressed, however, things took a turn for the chaotic, with Joelle's dance with a young man catching the eye of her nephew. It seemed that this young relative became envious, possibly due to his own romantic feelings for his aunt, leading him to want to keep others away from her. In his quest to intimidate the young man, Joelle pointed to Jaime, who, despite not yet having the distinctive facial tattoos he would later acquire, stood at around 5'3". However, it was Jaime's demeanor and attitude that made him an intimidating presence, perhaps more so than anyone else in the room. Jaime agreed to confront the young man, proceeding to the kitchen, where he retrieved a knife and warned the boy to steer clear of Joelle. The young man, believing that Jaime wouldn't actually follow through, issued a challenge. However, Jaime defied expectations and indeed stabbed the young man, leading to his return to prison. But something had changed this time. Jaime couldn't shake one thought from his mind. He had fallen head over heels in love with Joelle. It wasn't just because of the recent stabbing incident, but a genuine and profound love. As they say, love can compel us to commit acts beyond imagination. Hami no longer cared about his circumstances. He believed he could win over Joelle, despite their age gap, his imprisonment, and their initial encounter involving a stabbing. Hami began sending heartfelt love letters to Joelle, and eventually, she too succumbed to his affections. Thus, they embarked on a long-distance relationship. 11 months later, when Jamie completed his sentence, Joelle picked him up in her truck. However, her confidence wavered upon seeing that Jamie had acquired facial tattoos, raising doubts about the seriousness of their relationship. Despite all the waiting, Jamie's eagerness prevailed as he suggested to Joelle that they spend the night in a motel. Joelle agreed, albeit under the impression that it would be a one-night affair. Yet, Jaime, known as the sharpshooter, proved remarkably effective, as that single night led to Joelle becoming pregnant. With this development, she felt increasingly inclined to establish a lasting relationship with him. A mere 3 months later, they sealed their commitment in marriage. Jaime made solemn promises to Joelle, assuring her that he understood the hardships of growing up in a fractured family and vowing to be a devoted father and husband. However, even before their child came into the picture, he exhibited abusive behavior towards Joelle. It's at this point in the story that he began to adopt characteristics reminiscent of the Joker, not to sensationalize the narrative, but because there is a noticeable parallel. His abuse towards Joelle wasn't solely physical. It had a strong psychological element, perhaps driven by the belief that this form of harm could be even more devastating. An example of this occurred during one heated argument when things spiraled out of control. Jaime seized the ashes of Joelle's deceased mother from a vase and fled with them. He was keenly aware that Joelle had not yet come to terms with her mother's passing, and this act prompted her to call the police. Jaime was arrested, but the ashes were never recovered. This unfortunate incident resulted in Jaime being sent back to prison, causing him to miss the birth of his child. Upon his release, Joelle granted him another chance, hoping that, with the child's arrival, Jaime would take on the role of a responsible father. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a futile endeavor. Shortly thereafter, Jaime shifted his focus from physical harm to inflicting emotional distress on Joelle. She did something that greatly disturbed individuals like him who craved attention. She ignored him completely. Regardless of what he said or did, it no longer affected her. One day, in an attempt to provoke a reaction from Joelle, Jaime pushed her 7-year-old son off the bed, all while keeping his gaze fixed on her. His tactics proved successful. She became visibly upset and fetched a knife from the kitchen. In a stern tone, she warned him, "Mess with me, but never with my kids." At that moment, Jaime's face betrayed his surprise and fear. He hadn't anticipated such a response. Frightened, he reached out to his gang to extricate him from the situation. While outside the house, Jaime turned to methamphetamines, which explains his current aged appearance, making him resemble a 60-year-old man. Now that he no longer officially resided with Joelle, he commenced stalking her from outside her home. Joelle called the police, leading to Jaime's arrest and a 7-month prison sentence for violating his parole. However, within a week of his release, he resumed his harassment of Joelle. She would spot him outside her window, his gaze unwavering, and he would make menacing phone calls, threatening her and her children. Joelle contacted the police once again, but upon their arrival, they failed to locate Jaime. Days passed with no trace of him. Then, on November 8, 2011, Joelle received a chilling call from Jaime, in which he uttered the sinister words, "Check the news. I just killed a woman at the Morocco motel." Naturally, Joel's immediate response was to contact the police. However, They didn't take her seriously. What transpired next is where the story takes an eerie turn, as it was 5 days after this call that a motel employee discovered a gruesome crime scene in one of the motel's rooms. The victim was a 37-year-old woman named Yvette, a mother of 6. Details are scarce, but it appears to have been an exceedingly horrific crime scene. Investigators, who deemed it one of the most disturbing cases in their careers, found evidence of 2 knives and scissors used in the slow and torturous manner of death. Jaime, it seemed, harbored a sadistic streak. You might wonder how I have access to these gruesome details. Well, this wouldn't be his solitary murder, nor the most heinous. Even more chilling is the absence of any apparent motive for targeting this woman, strongly suggesting that she became a victim solely because of her resemblance to Joelle. Jaime would ultimately face arrest, trial, and sentencing for this horrifying murder. While incarcerated, Jaime took disturbing actions to further torment Joelle. He would occasionally contact Child Protective Services in an attempt to have her custody of her children revoked, knowing that this would inflict the most pain on her. He even went to the extent of trying to hire a hitman to eliminate her. However, because he communicated these intentions through letters, the police intercepted them before they could reach their intended recipient. These actions only added layers to the mask he wore, a facade he maintained to feel something, a desperate attempt to fill the void he had experienced as a child. The trial for the murder of Yvette dragged on for 5 years, during which Jaime displayed no remorse whenever he appeared in court. He would even wave and laugh at the victim's family. This extended trial was a result of Jaime's refusal to confess. It's worth noting that he managed to prolong the trial for more than half a decade by remaining silent. However, on March 24, 2017, just 3 days before the final trial, where the verdict was still uncertain, a news channel offered him an interview. They aimed to capitalize on his striking appearance to generate clicks and had planned to ask him challenging questions to elicit a confession. To everyone's astonishment, they didn't need to ask any questions because Jaime confessed to the murder of Yvette right at the start of the interview. It's evident that he did this to gain notoriety, as there is no doubt that he deliberately presented himself as a villain in the news. What corroborates this is his confession to 2 more murders, one at the age of 13 and the other at 19. The police initiated a search for the supposed victims based on Jaime's descriptions, since he hadn't provided any names. Given that he had spent his entire life in Bakersfield, the margin for error was minimal. However, the database did not yield any records of missing persons or unsolved murders that could be attributed to him. Therefore, it's highly likely that these claims are exaggerated. With all these confessions, Jaime was undoubtedly found guilty 3 days later. However, he did not receive the death penalty because of his confession on the day of the trial, which had caused a 5-year delay and wasted time and resources. Still, what remains perplexing to everyone is what happened next. Upon entering prison, he exhibited increasingly erratic behavior. He painted the walls of his cell with his own blood. On one fateful evening, he was placed in a cell with a man he harbored animosity towards, and he mercilessly stabbed him multiple times using a knife. He even inflicted a deep facial wound, requiring the victim to undergo 67 stitches. Jaime went so far as to request photographs of his victims as trophies, further underscoring the disturbing nature of his actions. He had earned a reputation as an inmate too dangerous to share a cell with anyone, but in a bewildering and illogical turn of events in March 2019, Jaime found himself with his first-ever cellmate, a 44-year-old man named Luis Romero. In 1992, at the tender age of 17, Luis, originally from Guatemala, had joined a gang in the United States and had taken someone's life during a confrontation with rival gang members. He had been sentenced to 27 years in prison and was on the verge of completing his sentence. However, in a confounding and irrational twist of fate, he was assigned to the same cell as Jaime, who had committed a more gruesome crime. Jaime was well aware of the extent of his own actions, having just committed them, boasting a lengthy history of criminal deeds. Moreover, he had been denied cellmates in the past because of the perceived danger he posed. Luis was merely 3 weeks away from regaining his freedom. In less than 24 hours since they had become cellmates, on the morning of March 9, 2019, when correctional officers came to inspect their cell, they stumbled upon an eerie sight. Jaime was smiling, wearing a collar. This collar was fashioned from various parts of Luis's body, and Jaime had gone as far as carving a grotesque, clown-like smile on Luis's face. He had toyed with his lifeless body, inscribed messages on the walls using blood, and declared, "I am the man of 1,000 faces." Now, the theories start to surface because it is evident that such an atrocity would require more than a mere hour. It would take many hours to commit such unspeakable acts. A correctional officer responsible for conducting a nighttime check reported that everything was in order, even though Luis's body indicated that the gruesome assault had already begun at that hour. Some guards attempted to justify this oversight by claiming that Jaime had placed a blanket to conceal the ongoing horror. But if an inmate places a blanket to obscure events behind a cell door, it is incumbent upon the guard to enter and investigate. What transpired here was not an isolated incident at this prison. It occurred at a prison which had gained notoriety due to allegations of guards organizing fights among inmates, all while placing bets on the outcomes. There exist videos of these fights, complete with a presenter and commentator. Furthermore, suspicions linger that this practice was employed when authorities sought to dispose of a troublesome inmate. They would orchestrate a fight, and when one participant was winning, they would shoot the other inmate, claiming they were intervening to save them. This case presents further complexity due to Jaime's clearly deteriorated mental state. It is evident that he harbors a fascination with the Joker, as evidenced by the blood-written phrases from the comics adorning his cell. It remains a mystery how he managed to procure razors to make knives, and his letter to a prosecutor inspired by the Joker and featuring the iconic "Why so serious" phrase raises questions. The letter also contained satanic messages, although it's doubtful he genuinely adheres to Satanism. These actions are likely undertaken for attention-seeking purposes. He received a diagnosis of an unknown form of schizophrenia within the spectrum, alongside antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, characterized by erratic behavior, which could explain his propensity to stab others without a clear provocation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result, authorities declared him unfit to stand trial. Consequently, at the age of 33, it appears improbable that Jaime will face the death penalty, and he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jaime was undeniably unhinged, with a touch of clownishness. However, some might argue that he endured a troubled childhood. Nevertheless, the extremity of his actions remains unparalleled. Interestingly, his older brother, who sought refuge with their grandparents at a young age, has since transformed into a prosperous individual, a millionaire who enjoys driving sports cars and has a loving family.